Chapter 271, The Turtle Dove Takes Over the Magpie's Nest. In the large room illuminated by sunshine, an abundant breakfast was set out on a long table. Besides a couple eating breakfast, however, this room was empty. They had met each other via speed dating. In order to suck up to the Major Noble Carolyn, Earl Samuel had let her stay by herself in his very own magnificent residence, while he and his family all temporarily moved out for the time being. This was quite convenient for what we wanted to do. Black tea. Yep, here you go. That milk cream bread from over there, thanks. No need to thank me, sister. Come, open your mouth, say ah. Let Carolyn feed you. When I finished my interrogation of Rex, it was already breakfast time. Just as I walked downstairs to the dining hall, I saw two green-haired ladies feeding each other. I sat down in a random chair and rang a bell to call one of Earl Samuel's servants over. I even ordered some food and poured some wine for myself, wanting to enjoy myself after being busy with work all night, but the moment I took a sip, I discovered that the wine leaked out from the skeletal bones of my chin. That was my current appearance. Alright then. The way that servant looked as if he wanted to laugh but didn't dare to laugh made me quite displeased. Come, sister, have some red wine. They started feeding each other in an even more intimate fashion. When one girl's mouth contained some wine, she approached the other girl's red lips. Their tongues tenderly met each other and silvery clear droplets dripped down, transforming into long silvery clear strands of saliva. A certain girl's hand was already reaching beneath the table, and the situation seemed to turn into one which was rated 18+. Ah! Even though Carolyn was the aggressive one today, she was kissed so much that she was out of breath. Lilith's hand kept doing various things to her as well, and 30 seconds later, Carolyn collapsed on the table with an incredibly red face, and her white skin, which was like a swan's, was filled with strawberry kiss marks. There were also numerous strands of saliva dripping out of her mouth, landing on the table. Meanwhile, as the victor, Lilith proudly glanced over at me, then stabbed her fork into a tiny tomato, ate half of it, and stuffed the other half into our captive's mouth, ending this round of feeding each other. Although the Triple Times F group's motto is that the same gender is true love, while love between opposite sexes is only for reproduction purposes, why does seeing this sight cause the anger in my chest to transform into flames dancing upon my hand? In my dark shadow, countless black-robed individuals are roaring into my ears, burn, burn, burn. Ouch! Just as I was impulsively about to take action, a painful bite on my finger snapped me back to my senses. The silly cat was there as expected, as she retracted her magically enchanted cat teeth and enjoyed the breakfast that I had just ordered. Silly cat! What are you doing? Stop acting like a little virgin boy that's never tasted meat before. Don't you know how unsightly you were just now? Fine then, let me fix my words. Even if you are a 300-plus-year-old virgin, don't make it so obvious. It's shameful. How could the silly cat possibly understand the rage of our Triple Times F group? Just as I was glaring at her with my flames of anger, that silly cat actually transformed herself into a blonde mature woman as she stretched lazily like she was a real cat and even dared to glance seductively in my direction. Do you want Big Sister to teach you? Usually, I enjoy pure young women, but I think that Princess Peach will be even more delicious. Her blonde hair cascaded like a waterfall, reaching the ground. Her delicate eyes were filled with an alluring splendor, and as she stretched she displayed her excellent curvaceous figure. Even though she was obviously trying to act seductively, she was still elegant enough to resemble a scholar who read through ancient tomes. It was as expected of a gold elf, the species known as the most beautiful species of all. At this instant, she was both incredibly alluring and elegant. That seductive expression of hers even moved both women on the other side of the table. Fine then, it would seem that Lilith had changed Carolyn into preferring women now as well. As for me, moved? Hey, silly cat. I already said before that anyone who dared bring up Princess Peach in front of me would meet misfortune. I said before that you were forbidden from transforming into a form taller than me. I held on to Daniel Wu's head as I angrily roared, "You're seeking death." Wait, don't do that to me. Even if you didn't like my sexy joke, it's not to the degree of. Harlois already knew what I was going to do to her thanks to our soul connection, but she was unable to finish her sentence. After some spatial distortions, what remained was only a pink-colored club. Yep, From today onwards, you shall become the legend-ranked weapon Pink Bunny. My enemies shall henceforth suffer the humiliation of defeat by a pink and furry bunny rabbit. You perverted, gay. In a way, the Lich was a classic example of an idiot who didn't know anything about the world because he spent too much time holed up only doing research. Although he wasn't as much as a ditz compared to Carlohan, who crafted her own soul container into a soul bottle and placed it right in her room. Rex, who carried his own phylactery with him, was quite something as well. My body and phylactery have to be in the same dimension. I just arrived in this plane less than 2 weeks ago and didn't manage to find a safe place to store my phylactery yet. I was intending on finding a place during this tour of inspection. Oh, that's why you made yourself into Daniel Wu's face. It's Galton's. I meant Rex's head. No wait. What head are we talking about? This is my head. I think that I was rather creative, and my phylactery was quite well hidden. Nobody would imagine that someone would make a phylactery into the shape of a skeleton head. I can just find any random grave and bury my phylactery, and then put on the skull of the person in the grave. All I have to do is switch heads, which will take 10 minutes, tops. 2. You definitely haven't come to the mortal plane in a long time, right? Or, maybe you didn't even become a Lich while you were in the mortal plane. I looked at him with pity in my eyes. If he really did what he intended with his phylactery, there was a 90% chance that he would end up with a tragic outcome and a joyous outcome for someone else. My lord, why do you say that? You're right, I became a Lich in the ice plane. Is something wrong with my idea? If it was still 160 years ago and if you're able to tolerate the stink of a corpse, it would indeed be a good idea. But ever since the legendary story Grave Robbing Handbook became a bestseller, where the main character of that story became a legend after grave robbing and gained incredible riches, the act of grave robbing attracted countless individuals. There's now even internal grave robbing rules and factions. And, after some people really did manage to dig up some ancient god equipment, many strong individuals also stopped caring about their reputations and joined in to start grave robbing as well. There was even a not so nice legend ranked mage who was addicted to grave robbing that invented a detection spell to find underground magical artifacts. Many mages that got desperate due to being really poor even joined in this profession part-time. The soul fire in Rex's head attached to my waist started flickering. He apparently understood what would happen if he really did what he intended with his phylactery. A Lich's phylactery is something incredibly rare and valuable. Amongst magical materials, it's considered legend rank and above. In that case, your head would have been dug up by someone in at most 2 weeks. Either it would be sold off at an auction as an unknown mystical artifact or it would be sent to the Holy Church as a cursed item needing to be cleansed. Either way, congratulations, because you'll be the most foolish Lich to have ever been born for dying in such a laughable manner. Rex's head fell silent, but his flickering soul fire was the best evidence of his fear. Meanwhile, my mood greatly improved as any displeasure at Harloy's teasing me evaporated. That saying was true after all, misery loves company. Making someone else miserable was always a great way to make myself feel better. Although I was having great fun, there was no longer anyone around me. Should I say that it was a happy coincidence? Although it was sudden, my plan went off quite smoothly. I now had full control over the Bardi Emperor's Imperial Envoy group. And, due to the fact that no humans wanted to stay overnight in the same residence as an undead, our night ambush that only a few of us participated in was highly successful as well as a well-kept secret. Nobody found out about it. The Lich only took one Death Knight and one high-level abomination as his guards. All his other guards were merely low-level undead that had temporarily been summoned. The Death Knight was the first to meet a painful demise on the night of our attack, as he clashed against a certain black-haired female ranger when responding to our ambush. And the result? Colin and Jan spent half an hour putting him back together again, but he still changed job classes to Headless Knight. Well, the shards of one, that is. Little Red even let out a dragon's roar as she partially transformed into a dragon and threw a punch at him. It was quite obvious that she wasn't intending to go easy at all, and so, her opponent the Death Knight was easily smashed to little pieces to the extent where it was difficult to put him back together again. And, in my eyes, this meant that after being chased around by weaklings all night Little Red needed to vent her accumulated stress. System, Are you sure that it's not because of you revealing her dark history? But that unlucky Death Knight could at least be proud for being able to die to a huge ancient dragon's power. As for that abomination, since the Duke's daughter Carolyn apparently despised its disgusting spell, it was merely given the task of guarding the outside of Earl Samuel's residence that Carolyn was staying at. By the time it received its master's command and finally managed to arrive, it just happened to meet with Little Red, who hadn't vented enough yet and met an instant end. Little Red even breathed out a little bit of dragon breath and demolished an entire stable. As for Carolyn's human guards, they were even easier to deal with. Her strongest guard was a middle-aged knight captain who barely managed to reach gold rank, which was basically nothing to us with our standards for power levels. This knight captain and his novice knight subordinates didn't even notice our presence or what we did last night. By the time they arrived next morning for morning drills, everything was already over. This wasn't the underground world where legend ranks were everywhere. In normal human countries like this one, it was already quite something for the eldest daughter of a noble to be able to have a gold-ranked master as a guard. Not to mention that her guards were also temporarily arranged on short notice. As for the problem of safety, even the top-level mercenary groups in the Lagraz Kingdom had only gold ranks as their leaders, not to mention the fact that a gold-ranked knight captain with some silver subordinates would easily be able to go just about anywhere in the relatively safe Bardi Empire. When I learned from Carolyn that her temporary guards were only under a simple contract, I immediately had Lilith acting as Carolyn in the contract right then and there and dismiss the guards and pay them right away. It was quite convenient that this gold-ranked knight captain had drank a bit too much alcohol last night due to the local noble's flattery towards him. When he saw that the Duke's daughter Carolyn appeared to grow several centimeters taller in a single night, he attributed it to his hangover. Perhaps the alcohol was quite strong last night, because this middle-aged knight kept thanking Carolyn in delight for receiving 3 months' worth of salary all at once, as if he had won the lottery. And, things after that would be even simpler, even if they were slightly different from what I expected. Such as a certain Duke's daughter surrendering to us much faster and much sincerer than anticipated. Fine then, I had to admit that our plan was even more successful than expected due to a certain female vampire's high ability to convince others and our kidnapped victim Carolyn's energetic assistance. Yet no matter how obedient or strangely Carolyn behaved, I still couldn't trust her. How could the eldest daughter of a duke give in so easily? If she reported us to the Bardi government or some noble, then that would give us a huge amount of trouble. So, we still continued as planned, and Lilith disguised herself as Carolyn. It was just that Carolyn now had a female servant that greatly resembled her in appearance. Meanwhile, I disguised myself as the Lichrex, and with his head that was attached to my waist helping me out, we could probably pull off this disguise. To make things even more realistic, I summoned my own personal Death Knight and Abomination. Daddy, Dang wants to eat meat. Bear with it for me. Oh, right, you can fill yourself up first with the remains of that abomination at the door. Just make absolutely sure nobody sees you eating. In a certain way, the saint-ranked beast tamer with me gave me an inspiration due to his ability to emit a true love domain. If his soul world was capable of helping other species to survive in it, perhaps my frigid winter earth would be capable of doing the same. However, after some experimenting, I discovered that it was easy for most items to become damaged after being stored in my world because of the extreme chill present in it. I doubted that any life forms with life in them would be able to survive in my world of snow and ice. Even if it was no good for the living, there wouldn't be any problem for the undead. And so, after I proved my theory about the undead being able to survive in frigid winter earth, I stuffed it with quite a large amount of low-level undead cannon fodder. But, it seemed like a waste of such a strong ability to only take cannon fodder with me. When considering that it was highly likely that we would meet trouble on this expedition, I figured that I should also put some high-level combat strength inside my world. And so, I asked Zayuo to loan Ade to me, but I even received additional help that I didn't ask for. Your Highness, there are so many cracks in this armor, and it's even glued together. How am I supposed to wear this? Like other top-level undead, the Ghoul King Dykus spent his time in humanoid form. He also had enough death magic power, so putting on a Death Knight's armor and pretending to be an ordinary Death Knight would be quite easy for him. But the problem was that Little Red had attacked the Death Knight a little too viciously. We spent a long time trying to piece the armor back together, and it was still evidently in no working condition. How about you go find a blacksmith to help you fix it up? Or, you might as well sew it together with a needle and make do. Do you know how long little Cohen spent on gathering all the little pieces? Complain a little less. Besides, you were the one complaining about being bored inside and wanted to come out. If you complain anymore, I'm going to toss you back inside and have someone else do it. Hearing this, Dikes, who was renowned as a mad dog on the battlefield, actually shivered in fear. He wasn't actually worried about the low temperature in my world of snow and ice, nor was it actually that he was bored as he said. That was just an excuse. Actually, I wasn't bored at all. Understanding the natural laws of that world helped me greatly. It's Skria who was too bored waiting there, and she began to sing. Alright then, I almost cried tears of sympathy right then and there. If I really did switch Dikes out for Graya, perhaps she would be so happy that she would start singing. That would be our turn for great misfortune. I was quite speechless as well. At the time, I clearly only asked for Odang, but another two of the four heavenly kings came along with me of their own volition. They must have been quite bored and free. Lionheart, can you stop being annoyed when I'm the one doing all the work? Of course, it would obviously be no good if there were only undead with us. Soon, we were scheduled to coincidentally meet a group of merchants from the Lagraz kingdom, and then coincidentally obtain some new guards and servants. Then, this Lagraz merchant group would receive the appreciation of Carolyn, the noble from the capital, and then obtain a pass to help the merchant group return to the Lagraz kingdom from some domain lord that Carolyn would convince. The rest would be even simpler. We would just have to continue the tour of inspection as planned, and when reaching a close by location, Carolyn would suddenly feel adventurous and head to Port Victoria, wanting to take a look at the sea together with the Lich Rex. Of course, this plan of mine wasn't infallible, but it was fine as long as it would take care of the current situation. By the time we were exposed, we should have long since escaped. Or, if we couldn't make this disguise work until the end, we'd just have to take each step at a time. As we left Earl Samuel's residence, which had just been robbed by us without him realizing it, and headed for the next noble's domain, I watched Earl Samuel and couldn't help but laugh. He had been so angry yesterday, but he was now saying goodbye to Lilith in such a sycophantic manner, not to mention that his neck still had a mark left from the chicken bone I threatened and held him hostage with. Galden, Rex, perhaps there really is a funnier way to die in this world. Note, 1, ed/n, for those of you who don't know, quoting from Wikipedia, Daniel Wu Yin Cho is an American actor, director and producer, and as of 2015, starring as Sonny in the AMC martial arts drama series Into the Badlands. He's also considered super handsome. Meanwhile, Rex was mentioned to be a handsome and popular Lich. 2, ed/n, Gul'dan is from WoW. From the WoW wiki, Gul'dan of the Storm Reaver clan was a former Orcish shaman of the Shadow Moon clan from Draenor, who became the first Orcish warlock as well as the founder of the Orcish Horde. Chapter 272, Wood Spirits. Those who had visited Port Victoria before would definitely fail to recognize it as the same flourishing city from the past. The dimensional overlap turned it into a one-of-a-kind location that couldn't be found anywhere else in Ike. This place was both part of the undead plane as well as part of the mortal plane, but, at the same time, it also belonged to neither. Judging by Undead Emperor Osso's personal arrival, the specific undead plane that was overlapped here was likely to be the famous Desecration plane. A frightening thought. It was obvious that countless undead armies would pour into the mortal plane if the dimensional descent was successfully completed. However, the undead weren't able to reach their goal. The original will of the undead emperors was to transform this entire place into a land of death that would be able to support a large number of undead from the undead planes. They would then slowly invade the surrounding mortal plane, transforming it into their own domain. At the very least, the natural laws of the undead planes would transform Port Victoria into a new undead capital, with innumerable dead crawling out of their graves. The dark, sunless undead plane was akin to a heaven for the undead, and a complete dimensional descent would finally enable the strongest high-level undead to enter the mortal plane. The newly born undead armies might not be able to leave this area for a while after being born, but they would have enough combat strength backing them up and would fear nothing when multiple undead emperors take over. That would herald the arrival of a new undead calamity. And it was precisely because they feared this that the Holy Church unhesitatingly declared a holy war against Orlos. Unfortunately, for the undead, there was a little hitch in their plan. The current Fort Victoria and its surroundings were now divided into two obviously different areas. One was a dark-seeming area filled with shadowy winds, which was the influence of the undead plane. The other was filled with bright sunshine and verdant green forests where trees grew at a furious pace. The foliage that covered the skies represented endless amounts of life force, and that mysterious sun caused the undead so much grief, hatred, and pain. The powers of life and death clashed against each other here, and in the air, the forest released light green clouds that fought with the gray clouds of death. The dimensional door to the undead planes, which should have opened up wide, had somehow gotten stuck, as this abnormal area began to remove itself from the control of both the undead and the mortal plane. The undead army's vanguard continuously arrived here from the undead plane, but this magical forest was actually evolving and growing as well. Near the entrance of the forest, there were two armies cruelly slaughtering each other. One of the armies was, of course, the undead army, while the other was no longer a simply group of magical plants that didn't know how to move. These native residents resembled descendants of some uncontacted tribe. From their outer appearances, one could tell that they were a life form that had never before existed in this world. They were, for the most part, humanoid, but their seemingly slender limbs possessed an inconceivably immense amount of strength, capable of lifting heavy objects multiple times heavier than their weight. They had different heights and body shapes. Some of them were less than half a meter tall, while others were giants that towered over 10 meters. What they all had in common, however, was their leafy green hair made of leaves and the tree bark armor embedded into their skin. With thorns and magical vines tangled around their bodies in a way that resembled clothing, they all had obvious plant characteristics. When looking at them from a distance, their elegant body shapes, rather nice appearing faces, as well as their slender figures among the forest made them closely resemble forest elves. However, if one got closer and observed their behavior in battle, nobody would mistake them for an elf species, as elves were known for being delicate and sensitive. They had no combat techniques whatsoever and relied only on pure instinct. Every one of their attacks were not only more vicious than that of the barbarians but also ridiculously strong and shameless. Yes, shameless. The undead had to worry about their soul fires being put out or their limbs being severely injured. While severe injuries to their limbs wouldn't kill them, it would render them useless in combat. However, these plant life forms' attacking methods solely consisted of techniques to perish together with the enemy. In addition, these plant life forms mostly fought together in groups. One of the tallest and strongest would stand in front as the vanguard, and they had tremendous strength in melee combat. The vines on their bodies were as nimble as arms, and they could twist their body parts freely in battle. Another side of their lack of combat techniques was that their attacks were completely unpredictable. Melee combat units that had such tremendous strength and couldn't feel pain were difficult to deal with as it was, but they had a more ridiculous undying nature than even the undead. Cut off its head? They just had to retreat for a few seconds and a new one would grow in its place. Some of the tall tree warriors even got so excited in battle that they directly ripped off one of their arms and tossed them out, which then exploded, killing large numbers of undead. But this wasn't the only part. Under green light, the shards from these explosions would transform into a new wave of smaller tree warriors and begin a new wave of attacks. What made the high-level undead the most afraid of all was that after spending so much effort to truly destroy one of these abnormal plant life forms, there would be a sudden patch of green fire that escaped from somewhere which would flit into a nearby skyscraper-level tree, and a little while later, a brand new tree warrior would emerge from the tall tree and enter battle yet again. And this wasn't simply an undying quality. The newly born plant warriors were even stronger than the previous ones, with even better combat techniques. They were even capable of learning combat techniques from the Death Knights and skeleton generals that they were facing, which increased their combat strength by an additional 20% each time. This didn't seem like much, but with a repeated cycle of revival several tens of or several hundreds of times, it probably wouldn't take long for these plant warriors to reach the level of sword saints. Due to the limits of the elemental tide and the mortal plane's dimensional will, the high-level undead were still unable to enter the mortal plane. And, the basic foundational strength of the low-level undead, swarm tactics, was losing out to these plant warriors that had even more ridiculous undying properties. However, these new creatures of wood possessed more than just warriors that didn't fear death. The smaller ones among them didn't seem like they had much strength but were actually even more difficult to deal with. Either they were able to control nature and cast all sorts of nature magic and use various natural talents, or they were able to control the forest's magical plants and targeted attacks. Just like their fellow species members that were skilled at melee combat, they were also undying. The leader of the undead army was nearing the point of despair. At the beginning, these tiny green-haired things were as weak as gnomes and were only capable of trembling in fear under the forest's protection. They blindly ran about everywhere, trying to escape the undead's slaughter. But now, in less than a week, these abnormal lives had evolved to the point of being able to directly face the undead armies. Yes, these plant life forms were all individuals, with their own thoughts and emotions, rather than being a part of Amelia. In fact, under the nurturing of Amelia's forest, they even evolved to the point of having their own language. And not long after, in the future, they would be named the Wood Spirits, named by Roland Mist, and enter history as a brand new species. If we aren't able to eliminate this entire forest, we'll never be able to win this battle. The Death Knight Cockeret came to the same conclusion as his companions. Without being able to eliminate this forest, these strange abnormal wood spirits would never die. However, in order to safely enter this forest, they would first have to kill off all these wood spirits and magical plants that were in the way. They were stuck in a vicious cycle. This is basically unsolvable. It's as if we are fighting against a dimensional will. They're supported by the power of fate and luck and have endless replenishment for their combat strength, while we keep decreasing in number. See, even our luck is becoming worse and worse. From far away, an exploding durian bomb was tossed randomly in the sky. While they were being tossed randomly, the wood spirits didn't have to worry about harming their own at all. There was a Death Knight engaged in fierce battle against a wood spirit, but the explosive shrapnel from the durian bomb just happened to explode the Death Knight into many little pieces, and even though there was less than 2 meters between them, the wood spirit was completely uninjured. If this was intentional, then this type of blind aiming and scattershot control far surpassed that of any top-level elven archer. And if it was all coincidental, the lucky wood spirit survivors deserve to go play the lottery. However, there was an endless amount of luck like this for the wood spirits, while the undead were forever on the unlucky side. Even idiots were able to tell that something was going on. The Lich known as Rod had far more experience than any great Lich. Rod was an old subordinate of Osso's while Osso had still been human, and he experienced so many countless battles. Rod also had battle experience across and between dimensions, so the analyses he made of any combat situation were considered trustworthy by all. Although Rod had never been able to progress in power level due to his body's nature and was still stuck at only the top of gold rank, his wisdom from accumulated experience and long service helped him to be one of Undead Emperor Osso's most trusted subordinates. Precisely because he was so trusted, Osso, who had already returned to the desecration plane, sent Rod out to see what was going on with the combat situation since things had reached a stalemate. Dimensional will? How is this possible? The dimensional will of Ike had long since sunk into a deep slumber. How could it possibly be present here, making things difficult for them? If this truly was caused by the fury of the Ike mortal plane's dimensional will, this dimensional door probably would have been fully sealed off long ago. An undead named Andro didn't respond to Rod's query, simply looking at the forest filled with the energy of life instead. What Andro imagined was an invisible hand that was covering him, with a demonic-seeming shadowy figure secretly laughing maniacally at them, deriding the uselessness of the undead army. Damn it! How is this possible? Andro finally noticed what was wrong. A high-level undead that had just collapsed didn't have his soul fire extinguished. Instead, the high-level undead was covered by a green light from the surrounding grass and began transforming from a pale ghostly white into green. The next moment, it tossed itself into a tree. Judging from the shape of the tree's bulge, It was in the process of giving birth to a new wood spirit. All the undead's corpses were devoured by this forest and became its nutrients. Meanwhile, the dead undead souls were absorbed by the forest soul and transformed into newly born wood spirits. The undead that excelled at attrition and long-term battles had met their most troublesome match of all, a similar species that did the same thing but even better. There's no mistake. It's currently stealing and absorbing souls. This basically contains its own cycle of reincarnation. This forest is a newly born dimensional will. Damn it, this is going to be so much trouble for us. Addendum. The below is an excerpt from one of Archmage Victor's lectures, in the year AD 1541, regarding his research on the origin of wood spirits. It's very difficult to believe that in the midst of a fiercely ongoing holy war, a cursed undead plane performed a dimensional descent and stole away more than 1 million lives while also simultaneously causing the creation of a brand new species, the wood spirits. Perhaps humanity has gotten used to the wood spirits' warm welcoming manner, sincerity, friendliness, as well as hard-working and peace-loving attitudes. Wood spirits are typically regarded as a textbook example of magnanimity and kindness, and very few dislike this species. However, very few actually know that from the moment this species was born, they were destined to face a continuous amount of battle, and they had to evolve through all this constant violence. In fact, for quite a long while after they were born and recognized as a new species, people viewed them as emotionless combat marionettes. The most unbelievable part of all was that their creator wasn't any god, nor was their creator some undying existence from another dimension, nor was their creator a member of the elf species, who view themselves as the best at using magic. Their creator was only an ordinary human female mage. Yes, there's no need to doubt me. Amelia Milan was the same as any one of you listening to my lecture or even me, who's giving it. She was an ordinary human who took slow steps progressing past the legend and myth ranks in the mage job class. Although there are many mysteries regarding how she was able to perform the act of creation, which is on the scale of a divine miracle, far too much time has passed since then and all theories are impossible to prove now. The theory I shall teach you all today is the one that sounds the likeliest, and it's also the most widely accepted one by contemporary academics. First of all, I should mention that in the mage country's records, her personality was considered slightly crazy, a bit too aggressive. What can be 100% confirmed is that long ago, she transformed her physical body into an entire magical forest filled with magical plants. Through this process, her soul also transformed into the will of the forest. Of course, it's impossible for any of us to know why Archmage Amelia from over 1000 years ago did such a thing. However, it's obvious that there's always a soul connection between a creator and what she creates. Judging by how cute her children were, the descriptions of the Holy Mother of the Forest in legends about how insane she was, or how many incredible criminal actions she did were obviously just artistic embellishments and attempts to stain her honor by her enemies. Alright, I won't mention those legends about her as everyone knows them already. We can easily tell that she received an elite education from the Bardi royalty since young, and we all know about how she became the back candidate for Holy Maiden for the Earth Church. This part is in the lecturer Victor's Day and Age. From these facts, we can infer that Amelia Milan must have been a gentle and agreeable female who had a saint's personality. I'm definitely not saying this because I have a wood spirit wife, nor is it because I'm worried that if I don't praise this mother of all wood spirits that I'll be sleeping on a tree when I return home, with my 2 human, wood spirit half-blood sons refusing to even call me dad. Chuckling from his students, cough. Getting back to the main topic, I shall begin from the tragedy that occurred that night. That was a truly large-scale tragedy of rare proportions. No wonder semi-god level undead were always viewed as forbidden taboos, as they're truly vicious. They prepared for 30 years and took only 1 second to activate the next step of their plan, which caused the entire flourishing merchant city of Port Victoria to transform into a city of death with not a single living human in just an instant. When the dimensional descent occurred at Port Victoria, over 1 million lives were instantly lost, and their grudges from their sudden deaths transformed into a physical curse. Simultaneously, due to the unique properties of this location which now had traits from both the mortal and undead planes, These grudges and hatred had no place to go and could only cycle around in that sealed unique dimensional space. What the undead emperors had been planning at the time was that this entire area would become just like the undead plane, and that those grudge-holding ghosts and curses would become the undead, transforming into the foundational requirements for a new land of death. But, no matter how much one plans, one can never overcome the power of pure coincidence. Perhaps the only part that they didn't plan for was that on that day, Amelia Milan just happened to be in Port Victoria. Although Amelia Milan had semi-god ranked strength, she still had zero power to resist the dimensional natural laws. In that instant, she also experienced the transformation from the living into the dead. However, archmages typically have many ace cards up their sleeve, such as a magic spell to instantly transform into a lich after dying. And just as I mentioned earlier, Amelia had previously transformed her entire body into a magical forest. When she transformed from the living into the dead, this process only changed her into a magical forest that had lost its sense of self. The specific undead plane that came into contact with the mortal plane didn't possess any plants within it. No such things as undead plants exist according to natural laws either. So, in that instant, Amelia became a bug-like existence in the natural laws. She was both a living gathering of plants, as well as an existence that was technically dead due to the undead plane's dimensional descent. After a short moment, she became the only living existence as well as only existence who approached the divine in this tiny new dimension, so she managed to obtain the power to control this newly born dimension, just like that, without realizing it. Yes, it was a new and independent dimension, not the overlapping point of the two dimensions. The result of Port Victoria getting stuck between the undead plane and the mortal plane was that it became an independent dimension of its own. Once this independent dimension chose a dimensional will of its own, the process of the dimensional descent was forcibly halted. The newly born dimension followed its instincts and searched for a powerful enough will that had the capacity to run a dimension. And, the first will that was born in this dimension became its only candidate. Add on to the fact that this will came from a soul to its semi-god ranked strength, and Amelia's will naturally became the best choice possible. As for information regarding the study of dimensions, and why my peers and I came to this conclusion, you all can study the textbooks written by archmages from Amelia's generation, Archmage Harloy's theoretical discussions regarding time and space, and Archmage Roland Mist's 18 Rules of Dimensional Travel, 28th Revised Edition. This is probably the final edition. Oh, right, Roland Mist wrote many academic works, but at least half of them are just tales about legends and modern stories from that time period. Obviously, they're fakes done by someone else, and the real ones typically have more than 20 revised editions. Make sure that you don't make a mistake finding one of Roland Mist's real works. Anyways, getting back to the topic, when this newly born little world chose Archmage Amelia as the master of this dimension, especially in a situation where Amelia had lost her own sense of self, her physical body, which was now a magical forest, began to instinctively evolve. And countless grudge-holding ghosts now had a refuge they could seek. Dimensional wills have absolute power and control over the dimension's resident souls. This is also one of the basic natural laws of dimensions that Archmage Roland Mist had determined, and, coincidentally, the Holy Mother of the Forest, Amelia, who had a motherly nature to begin with, accepted these souls and began searching for a way to help them come back to life. Dimensional wills have the ability to create life forms within their own dimension, and only dimensional wills have the ability to approach the divine domain of creation that belongs to the goddess of creation. This is also one of the natural laws of dimensions that Archmage Roland proposed. And so, coincidentally, the Holy Mother of the Forest used a combination of humans and elves as the base model in addition to treants that she was familiar with, and used her magical plants as the basic blueprint for evolution, which helped her to naturally produce the first generation of wood spirits, the original wood spirits. Dimensional wills are constructed from a mix of order and chaos. The most basic power of order is to control time and space, while the most basic power of chaos is evolution. This is the third natural law of Archmage Roland. In front of the power of order that a dimensional will would possess, distorting time and space isn't difficult at all. Performing evolution, which would take other life forms millions of years, is also possible. The threat of the undead plane caused the Holy Mother of the Forest to instinctively sense danger and increase the speed of evolution of her newly born children. After receiving blessings from both time and evolution, these wood spirits that were the favored children of their new world evolved at a rapid pace in this new dimension, receiving their own history, culture, and inheritance. They also battled against the undead armies for a long, long time, which helped temper this newly born species' ability to survive and will to live on. This is how we arrived at modern the wood spirits, this species which seems to contradict itself with how skilled at battle they are despite how kind and friendly they are as a species. As for why all the wood spirits have the habit of addressing Archmage Roland as Father Ray, it's time for class to be over. Alright then, if you would like to hear this gossip, please wait for the next lesson. Chapter 273, Resident Evil. Young man, I think highly of you. Continue working hard. When the young, compared to me, Baron Matt welcomed us, the sycophantic smile that he did his best to show me made me feel incredibly unnatural. It was as if a muscular gorilla was doing his best to imitate the faint smile of a young woman. Alright then, I just exposed this Baron Matt's physical characteristics. Apart from the fact that he wasn't black and hairy, he basically resembled a muscular gorilla. We followed the planned route of the original Imperial envoy of inspection, and we only stayed at Baron Matt's residence for a single night. However, that was enough for plenty of things, such as receiving kickbacks, receiving bribes, and extorting Baron Matt. Since we weren't scheduled to stay here for long, the young Baron Matt was quite nice to us and immediately brought up the main topic he was interested in. There was currently a large stack of paper currency printed by the Bardi National Bank in front of me. Due to the overly strong centralization of power, the money system in the Bardi Empire had gradually been replaced from gold coins to the more convenient paper currency. As for this small present in front of me, it was 2 full stacks of the largest value of paper currency, equal in worth to at least 50,000 or 60,000 gold coins, an amount sufficient enough to purchase a medium-sized residence. You're insulting my moral boundaries. Although I was saying so, my tone was quite indifferent, and I was looking elsewhere. I was making it obvious by averting my gaze that what I really said was, "You think that's enough? You think I'm a beggar?" Baron Matt grit his teeth. He thought about how his application to rise in noble rank to an earl had been obstructed by the House of Elders in the Bardi Empire for the past 3 years, and this was despite the fact that his territory was the size of an earl's. Unless a major personage from the capital helped him out, he would probably only be a baron for the rest of his life. If anything happened, he might not even be able to keep his own domain or secure his children's rights to succeed his peerage. Matt, who was once an adventurer, could be described as someone who had lived the dream of creating everything he had from nothing. His power level was halfway in the legend rank, and he was one of the strongest well-known warriors in a 100-kilometer radius. He and his companions earned quite a significant amount of money in their adventures, and Matt used his status as a frontier development knight to even gain a territory for himself. He was definitely a classical example of an ordinary person who had managed to make it big and become successful in life. However, it was a pity that nobles had deep traditions of valuing bloodlines and illustrious families. Bumpkin Baron Matt had never been able to get rid of that nickname attached to him by the other nobles, and the Baron noble title that he purchased using money didn't even come with inheritance rights for his children. His domain was also exceedingly well off and large, so the other nearby domain lords all wanted a slice. There had always been endless amounts of trouble for him, and the fact that he didn't have a noble title equaling that of his domain's status had always been his greatest weak spot. After Orlos completed a reorganization of noble law, all noble titles of baron and higher required the capital's noble house of elders to approve a promotion. However, Matt had never received any military achievements in the army, nor did he have any background. It was impossible for his request to be approved. As he was a former adventurer who had witnessed the cruelty of battle, he didn't want to give up on his comfortable life that he was able to obtain after so much hard work, nor did he want to gamble his life in the military, and so, he could only wait and spend his days as a baron. Matt even hired a scholar to teach him about noble ways and learned that his only hope was to rely on some powerful noble that had influence in the capital. But, If any of those major nobles were interested enough to take even a second look at him, then he wouldn't have had the derisive nickname of Bumpkin. He was quite satisfied with simply being a rich domain lord. After all, he had excellent personal combat strength and a powerful heavy hammer, so none of the nearby domain lords dared to touch him. However, his son was growing up quickly. Unless he was able to somehow succeed in getting his son rights to succeed his noble peerage, this domain would be returned to the country as the Bardi Empire's property, and his son wouldn't have any noble title or domain to his name. How could Matt possibly stand for this after working so hard for what he obtained? However, Matt finally met a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity today. The Lich Rex, who was the imperial envoy, and a duke's eldest daughter, Carolyn, had arrived. This helped reignite Baron Matt's ambitions for the possibility of becoming Earl Matt in the future. He had already heard that the high-level undead had greater influence with Emperor Orlos than even archdukes. He figured that as long as this Lich was willing to help him say a few words, this matter would be such a small thing to the major nobles from the capital and will be easily resolved. When Matt saw that the imperial envoy Lich Rex actually felt like this wasn't enough money, Matt, who was typically stingy, felt a great heartache. He would really have to pay up a lot of money. But more than the heartache, however, he was delighted. This was one of the few times someone was willing to accept a present from him, meaning that what he wanted would finally be possible. How have I gotten to this level that I'm so happy that someone's willing to accept my money? Of course, he wasn't going to talk about his regrets. He knew that he had to bury his delight in his heart. Matt even intentionally displayed an expression of pain and regret so that he wouldn't be taken for all he was worth. He even added an expression of hesitation. However, I laughed. This Matt fellow was to be expected as a muscle headcanon fodder. He was a terrible actor. If he really felt pained or hesitant at giving me more money, he would have just left. His facial muscles were almost about to twitch. That was how fake his anger was. Of course, I didn't intend to reveal that I saw through him already. Otherwise, how would I obtain what I really wanted? Sincerity is the most important. I said so in a deep tone as I gazed at the silver-colored epic ranked hammer attached to Matt's waist. I smiled meaningfully. This time, Matt didn't have to act, as he really did have a bitter expression now. Epic ranked weapon, Slayer of the Undying, attack power, 30/30. Special Effect 1, Undead Slayer. Any undead that comes into contact with this weapon has a probability of being instantly destroyed. Special Effect 2, Divine Protection. Summon a golden divine protective field which can resist against the invasion of evil. Lasts for 30 seconds. Any that forcibly invades the field shall receive 5 holy light damage per second. Special Effects 3 and 4. Since the user of this hammer is not in a divine job class, currently not activated, there is crooked line of silver words on the hammer's handle. This warhammer once belonged to a true holy knight. Only those that are truly holy will be able to utilize the full power of this hammer. System reminder: you're a sword saint, but you'd rather become a hammer saint? Comrade Rollo Big Hammer. To my surprise, I also saw on Matt's bookshelf all the books: Engraver Robbing Handbook and 18 Ways to Use Luoyang Shovels. That helped me to understand how this adventurer, who had only been an ordinary person, obtained this holy warhammer. At this moment, I even hesitated whether or not I should sign an autograph for this loyal fan of my books. But, the moment my system informed me of this hammer's name, I decided that I absolutely had to obtain it. I'm called an Undying, and this hammer is named Slayer of the Undying? That's just too unlucky for me. I can feel evil intentions coming from the world. Yep, I should obtain it and make Harlois eat it. These abilities seem quite useful. As for whether or not Harlois, who used to be undead, would have stomach troubles upon eating such a thing was something I didn't consider at all. At the very least, in the past, Harlois was unable to eat that holy sword named Pale White Justice, which contained the power of holy light. This would be a perfect opportunity to see if she became stronger after rejoining the living. I also hoped for her to be able to continuously combine and evolve, surpassing even true god tier equipment. But then I suddenly thought of how using a lolly to slice at other people made me mysteriously seem like a lolicon. Then I recalled that she was actually a fake lolly who was thousands of years old, which instantly made me feel better. Tremble in fear, mortals, for the pink bunny shall now have new abilities. Undead, tremble in fear at your impending doom. Death is nothing to be afraid of, but dying at the hands of this weapon will be a true humiliation. Yep, I should tie 2 butterfly knots at the top of this club and draw a smiley face. I should add a pink stuffed rabbit on the club as well. Thinking about how embarrassed and unwilling my enemies would be to be beaten to death by such a weapon, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. My soul voice's laughter from the Lich form I was in echoed throughout the room, causing Matt to instinctively shiver. However, Harlois was the first to be displeased. "If you dare to toy with me like that, then I'll dare to cancel my weapon transformation at a time when you're fighting with some powerful enemy. Who cares? At most I'll just show everyone my naked body one time and make sure that your name as a lolicon pervert gets known far and wide in the mortal plane." Alright then, thinking about how my pink and fluffy club that I was attacking with would suddenly transform into a naked lolly. That sounded rather interesting. I meant awkward. It would seem like the silly cat still needed more proper training. I temporarily gave up on this idea of mine, as what I first needed to do right now was to scam Matt and obtain this excellent hammer weapon of his. Making a warrior give up his personal weapon, not to mention that this warrior was a top-level warrior halfway in legend rank, would seem quite difficult. However, the current Matt was no longer the same warrior from 5 years ago. His peaceful and luxurious daily life had decreased his fighting spirit. The only thing he now looked forward to in life was pretty much his own territory and noble rank. Plus, he really was here for this after all. I was wondering why an imperial envoy and a duke's daughter would come visit a far-out domain like mine. It seems like I'm going to have to give this hammer up in order to protect what I have. Matt had already realized this long ago. More than half of his reputation as the undead slayer had been earned by this hammer of his. And due to his well-known reputation, since undead were now one of the main factions in this country, it was only natural that he would attract a lot of unwanted attention and trouble due to his nickname. This was no different from wearing a set of dragon slaying equipment and dragon hide armor in front of a huge dragon. It would definitely be at the extent of being able to attract aggro simply with one's face. If that person didn't die, then that would be really strange. Looks like I can't escape this after all. Perhaps giving it up now will even be good for me. At the very least, I can express my friendly attitude. Matt looked at the excellent hammer on his waist nostalgically one more time as he carefully placed it on the ground. Since I was disguised as a lich, it was only natural that I wouldn't dare to touch this holy hammer, so the female knight behind me picked up this heavy hammer in my stead. She lovingly caressed the hammer all over. And, when the silver hammer came into contact with her, it began glowing with a silver light, emanating a mysterious aura of fighting spirit. Perhaps it felt like its old master had made it lonely for too long already, and it thirsted for being able to re-enter the battlefield. A holy knight? No. How could a holy knight who believes in the holy light possibly be together with a lich? She's probably in a divine job class for some other god. Matt soon let go of his doubts, as the most important to him right now was whether or not the lich in front of him would be satisfied with his sincerity, and whether or not he would successfully be able to obtain a promotion to an earl. In a way, this was the tragedy of a former hero in his later years. As someone who created everything he had from nothing, perhaps he was fearless in his youthful and young adult years, but once he truly possessed a warm and loving family as well as a sufficient amount of wealth, he lost his courage and daring spirit. If he had still been an adventurer and a noble dared to try to steal or extort his wealth and weapon from him, then he would have instantly responded with a swing from his hammer. As for those greedy, law-breaking, moral-lacking, evil nobles that abused the commoners, he would kill any that he came across. If he met any that were too strong for him to take on, he could at least beat them up and then run away. It was the same for this legend-ranked Lich Rex before him. If Matt had been at his strongest, he would have dared to summon his adventuring friends to come slay the Lich. Unfortunately, he now had to suck up to this Lich and even bribe him. Sometimes, life was truly ironic. Now that Matt was in the prime of his life, not only did he become a noble himself, he even voluntarily gave this Lich his wealth, all in order to obtain a higher noble rank to benefit his wife and son. Matt shook his head as he put all his thoughts behind him, as he knew he wouldn't have another chance like this if he missed this opportunity. This former hot-blooded hero did his best to recall how the evil merchants that he looked down upon so much would suck up to others. Then, he did his best to smile sycophantically, and he even kneeled on one knee with his good knee, the knee that hadn't taken an arrow before. As for me, I merely smiled, and was too lazy to care about what he thought. I simply indicated to Yawn that she should put the hammer away. "It's good that you understand. After you die, I'm willing to help you become one of us undead." "Right. Did you know that Lady Carolyn is a huge fan of adventuring stories? She's especially interested in adventurers' personal journals and hand-drawn maps. These are all precious treasures to her. If she can obtain anything like this, it'll be quite easy for her to speak up for your case as well." Adventurers' personal journals were both records of their adventures as well as evidence of their glory. But since Matt was already willing to give me his weapon, which was his life and blood, these memorabilia of past glorious achievements didn't count for much. Soon, I returned quite satisfactorily with a cart filled with handwritten journals and geographical information. Actually, this information here, especially the hand-drawn maps from a veteran adventurer like Matt, was the true goal that I was here for. That hammer of his was something I simply decided to scam from him since I could. Of course, if a real Lich like Rex had visited Matt, the first thought the Lich would probably have upon seeing this hammer would be to kill Matt immediately. I immediately sent Matt's servants back with the excuse that we didn't need their assistance. This would obviously help prevent us from exposing our real identities, although it would also cause us to have nobody to guide our way. Of course, it wouldn't be a big problem as long as we stuck to the main road, but that was far from satisfactory. After all, nobody would be able to stick to the main road when running for their life. As a proper noble daughter, it would have been quite strange if Carolyn knew anything about geography or had a map on her. In this generation, maps and locations of cities counted as military secrets. Anyone who understood cartography and how to draw maps would be a professional. It would be quite rare to find a cartographer that was an ordinary civilian. However, I knew that there was a special profession whose practitioners would always think of a method to get the most complete map of all, which would even include secret passages and shortcuts not shown on official governmental maps. Their maps would even be labeled with threat levels for each area and important things to watch out for, which were quite convenient. Yep, it was quite easy to guess. Naturally, I was talking about the profession known as adventurer, as they were typically wandering vagabonds. There were perhaps incredibly few professions that moved about as often as adventurers did. Forget about not taking maps, compasses, or not having any informational backup, but if an adventurer didn't even take enough food and clean water with him on an adventure, then it wasn't called an adventure anymore. It would be called suicide. A veteran adventurer's personal journal and map collection would have more detailed information than any information I could obtain from the government. In order to prepare for the possibility of being chased and needing to escape, I absolutely wanted to obtain a copy of such information for myself. By the way, I should mention that due to the differing personalities of individual adventurers, their personal journals focused on completely different areas. For example, a certain dragon's adventuring journal focused only on the best foods and alcohols available in each location, as well as including maps and timetables of each location's times when they would receive new stocks of food and alcohol reserves. This particular journal would be highly treasured by any alcoholic. And due to some special reasons, my personal adventuring journal typically, and intentionally, reduced my personal feelings as much as possible. Although there was a huge amount of information in it, it was quite boring and would put most people to sleep. Gnome adventurers' journals could typically be viewed as guides for local businesses, while Beastmen adventurers' journals typically contained stories about fighting. As for Adam, how could a musclehead like him have the brains to write a journal? Although Matt was a musclehead as well, his wife was apparently one of his adventuring companions back in the day, and she had excellent attention to detail. Her adventuring journal was incredibly detailed and even contained many comments about legends and historical records, which just happened to be what I wanted. Alright then. I didn't exactly lie to this former adventurer who was at the beginning of approaching elderly age. At the very least, I didn't promise him a single thing and simply accepted his presence. He was the one who misunderstood of his own volition. Fine then. Seeing how kind he was and how much he had helped me out, I indeed told Carolyn about what he needed. For this type of small matter, she could take care of it with a single message. The only thing was that she would be able to return to the capital. As for why I was uncertain if she would return, That was because based on the current situation, I felt like she was likely to elope with Lilith. Now that I had profited hugely, and while I was making our plans for future paths to take, the silly cat suddenly came looking for me. She looked incredibly serious, which was quite rare for her. "Roland, there's something that you have to come take a look at." This time, they've really gone overboard. I'd say that they went even more overboard than you did as young I. There was a large amount of empty space in Baron Matt's residence's backyard. There was also a large amount of grains stored here, and in one of the warehouses, Harlois showed me a pile of grains that could be commonly found anywhere. The golden wheat still contained some of the chill of winter and was quite cold to the touch. However, I could not notice anything out of the ordinary with the sweet. "What's the matter? What's wrong? Haven't you felt something odd about eating the grains here while we've been in the Bardi Empire? It tastes especially sweet." At first, I thought that it was a unique situation caused by the local earth and water, so I decided to come check out the grains stored here, but I opened up the stack of grains and tore apart a stalk of wheat. I put some in my mouth and chewed slowly, carefully tasting them. They do taste rather sweet and it's even a little familiar. It's just like. Even though it was at the tip of my tongue, I couldn't recall what it was that seemed so familiar about the taste. Casolin's tears? Yeah, that's the flavor. Wait a moment, Casolin's tears? That's the best magical ingredient catalyst undead magic is capable of creating. Harlois transformed into her humanoid form and twisted some stalks of wheat in her hand, grinding it into a golden dust. Then, she used some filtering devices to increase the purity and added supplemental medicines to it as she stirred. What finally remained at the bottom of her beaker was a gray-black fluid. Then, she handed it to me, and I drank it all in an instant. When I felt the power of death getting slightly excited within my body, I came to an instant conclusion. There's no mistaking it. This is the taste of Casolin's tears. It just replenished all the mana I spent on maintaining the skeletons today. This bottle of Casolin's blessing is definitely at the minimum at an elite potions tier. These Casolin's tears are of rather high quality. Casolin's tears by itself was something harmless and non-poisonous. However, it was one of the main ingredients in another potion that was a favorite for undead mages, Casolin's Blessing. This was an excellent potion which had the ability to restore death magic mana, and it also possessed the ability to slowly change the drinker's physical characteristics and help improve the drinker's ability to control undead magic. This was literally the most desired potion by all undead mages. Pure Casolin's tears had long since become a forbidden product by the Holy Church, not to mention that they weren't easy to cultivate. If all these grains had been tainted by Casolin's tears, this couldn't possibly be a coincidence. I was faintly detecting the presence of an astonishingly huge plot. Perhaps Casolin's tears by itself was harmless and non-poisonous, but as the best undead magic ingredient catalyst of all, it was incredibly common in many large-scale spells and forbidden spells. I refuse to believe that whoever plotted all this would use such a large amount of Casolin's tears simply to improve the taste of the wheat. All of the grains here have been tainted? Damn it. Which undead mage is so insane? Just what does he intend to do? However, Harlois shook her head. I already asked. These grains were just harvested from the local fields. From start to finish, nobody touched them apart from the local farmers. And they were just harvested and stored here yesterday. How is that possible? Wait a moment, could it be the source? I had an expression of astonishment and disbelief. If this was true, then this was a truly monumental plot that was underway. Yes, you're right. I already asked. All of the seeds for these grains were excellent quality seeds received from the capital and have a 20% harvesting rate better than average. And these seeds have already spread throughout the entire Bardi Empire, and many people have been eating these grains for 10 years or more. Eating Casolin's tears for over 10 years? Were the plotters intending on creating a large number of undead mages by increasing the average citizen's affinity for undead magic? No, wait, there was still one other possibility, a certain little trick popular among high-level undead mages. Harlois obviously guessed at this possibility as well, but she appeared quite hesitant. After all, such a conclusion was far too insane to even think about. You should know that undead mages that consume Casolin's tears for a long period of time are more than twice as likely to turn into high-level undead that maintain their intelligence after dying. Damn it, which maniac came up with such a large-scale plot? I heard before that all undead emperors are insane. I didn't believe it before, but now I believe it. The game's scenario only mentioned that the Bardi Empire would soon be sunk into an undead calamity, but I never expected that there would be so many unexpected curveballs involved. If the undead calamity was activated here in such a fashion, the entire Bardi Empire would become a land of undead. Just how maniacal would one have to be to do such a thing? Congratulations to host for triggering the hidden epic ranked side quest. Why does the game, Resident Evil, exist in another world as well? You have unlocked the Anti-Zombie series of achievements. You can now exchange for specialized anti-zombie firearms. Go ahead and enjoy your fun playing the Resident Evil series in a magical fantasy world. System notification: I'm really impressed with you. Instead of activating the next portion of your main storyline quest, you went and triggered a hidden side quest. If you don't want to have your mystical fantasy adventure turn into Resident Evil and an Armageddon, hurry up and continue your main storyline quest at the Cloud Tower. Chapter 274, New Chapter. When I saw how my system lettered its message with gold, I had the sudden impulse to crash my head into a wall. Epic quest, the hell? Isn't it a little too difficult for me to be thrown into the world of Resident Evil all of a sudden? Besides, this is clearly supposed to be a mystical fantasy world. Why would Resident Evil suddenly appear? What does it even mean when it said I can now exchange for firearms? Do you really intend to watch me learn how to use guns and play in a real-life FPS game? My continuous retorts received no response. I could only face the clearly worsening situation. Making ordinary grains possess Casolin's tears as part of their chemical components and even helping them grow naturally would be equivalent to creating an all-new unique species of grain. I didn't have the capability to do this. But that didn't mean that the undead emperors, the rulers of the undead plains, wouldn't have the power to do so. By now, with my system's hints, I could pretty much guess at the undead emperor's intentions. Ordinary humans would be unable to ingest the medicinal potion Casolin's Blessing. It was an excellent curative and mana replenishment potion for high-level undead mages. Yet human bodies had an astonishing power to adapt. An extremely slight amount, when accumulated over the days and years, would possess the power to change the physical nature of human bodies. If this grain had been consumed by the entirety of the Bardi Empire's population for over 10 years, then it was possible that most people in the Bardi Empire possessed an astonishing amount of Casolin's tears within them. They would have an astonishingly high natural talent for undead magic, and once the undead plague or undead calamity or whatever arrived, perhaps it would be time for everyone to play Plants vs. Zombies together. Not only will the undead calamity easily spread far beyond what was anticipated in scale, it will likely also create an incredible number of high-level undead. I think that Baron Toilet will be at least at the level of a Death Knight Lord. Undead calamities will never lack in cannon fodder, but they usually lack mid-level elites and highest-level combat strength, and this would make up for their weakness. That guy's name was Matt, not Toilet. One fine. I know it's not time to comment on his name. If it were me, since the Bardi government is already supporting me to such a great degree, even spending 20 years to cultivate a large group of undead mages is worthwhile. By that time, the undead armies will have large numbers of mid-level elites and Lich candidates. But even if we now understand their plot, what can we do? When I asked Harlois this question, she was instantly rendered speechless despite how eloquent she had been just earlier. Indeed, what were we supposed to do? Just because we discovered their plot didn't mean that we'd be able to deal with it. The undead emperors had been preparing in the Bardi Empire for at least the past several decades. We entered this too late. To use an analogy, it was as if we joined in on the losing side of a chess game when the situation was totally under the enemy's control. There was no way to overturn the situation. As for fighting the undead army's current forces head-on, first, let's ignore how the undead were now considered high-ranked nobles recognized by the Bardi Empire. Attacking another country's nobles would be no different from declaring outright war. Even without caring about the chaos that would bring, I wouldn't win in a head-on fight as there were 13 undead emperors in total. If 2 or more of them fought together against me, I would be forced to use God's descent. And if the undead emperors I faced were the veterans among undead emperors, Perhaps even God's descent wouldn't be sufficient. But fortunately, although I wasn't sure why, I hadn't noticed the signs of the undead emperors descending upon the mortal plane yet. The complete descent of any existence at such a high level onto the mortal plane would bring about obvious signs. The true gods would definitely send divine messages as well. Since everything was still calm for the time being, it would seem that their dimensional descent plan must have met with an unexpected obstacle. Most normal people here would only consider how to defend against the undead emperor's invasion. However, I thought much deeper into things than that, with greater complexity. After all, I was once an undead emperor as well and knew much about them. While it was normal for other humans to view these semi-god undead emperors as harbingers of destruction, I knew that they actually had their own desires and goals. They definitely weren't the type of idiots who destroyed only for the sake of destruction. Transforming the entire mortal plane into another undead plane is definitely impossible. That would mean destroying the entire cycle of reincarnation, which would be the equivalent of declaring war against all the order gods and chaos gods simultaneously. Besides, the undead plane's environment should be the most suitable for the undead. But, if they choose to join the holy war, they have to choose either the side of order or chaos, or at least a temporary alliance with one side. The undead definitely don't have a good relationship with the holy light, but they have equally bad compatibility with the demons of chaos. It doesn't seem likely that they'll join either side. So is there a third option that I'm missing? Or are they intending to fight all on their own with no allies? But they're investing so much into this and paying such a large price. What's their final goal? Many thoughts coursed through my mind. As long as I didn't know the final goal of the undead emperors, it would be quite difficult for me to think of suitable counterplans to deal with them. Ask the Holy Church for help. The Holy Church had already declared war against Orlos. Even if I gave the Holy Church evidence of what I just found, that would only increase the speed at which the Holy Church brought war to the Bardi Empire's doorstep. Disguise ourselves and sneak into the Bardi Empire's capital city. First of all, we were already so busy with other matters. And as long as the enemy wasn't an idiot, the Bardi Empire's capital city would possess an insane amount of combat strength in it right now. Even a true god's avatar would likely find it difficult to survive there. It would seem that I'm going to have to use Plan W. What? You're actually going to use that plan that's completely lacking in morals? You need to think about the consequences. Aren't you afraid of the endless repercussions? I've already thought about them. No matter what the result is, at least it'll be better than now. Right, help me word things and write the report. Sure. Just tell me what your plan W is first, and I'll immediately write the report for you. Just what could this plan be? It actually even needs a report? Who is this report for? Seeing how the silly cat was doing her best to not laugh, I knew that she had been teasing me yet again. You didn't even know what Plan W was and you still called it completely lacking in morals and having endless consequences? You're such a rascal. You're the rascal. Let's not mention how you never even brought up this Plan W of yours, but whenever you think up such a large-scale plan, when was it ever not insane with endless consequences? Even if I didn't know the details, I know that someone like you will never come up with any normal ideas. Alright then, she really got me there. It would seem that I had absolutely nothing I could counter her with. Describing my Plan W as completely lacking in morals, insane, and possibly possessing endless consequences all seemed to be right on the mark. The core thought process of this plan was, since the enemy's already flipped the table and is acting ridiculously, nobody can play by the rules anyways, so why don't we just bomb the entire room? I thought that this silly cat had spied on my plan from somewhere yet again, but I had only come up with this plan of mine a few days ago and hadn't told anyone yet. In that case, I may as well explain it to her now. And when I finished explaining my plan to her, just as I expected, that blonde lolly revealed an expression of shock and disbelief. That look in her eyes seemed to be angrily roaring at me. Just what the hell is your brain made of? Even drool was dripping out of her mouth without her noticing it. It made her seem like a broken lolly. But, as expected of a 1,000-year-old fake lolly whose personal accessories were all mega artifacts, she soon regained her senses. After some thinking to reorganize her thoughts and digest the fierce impact she just received, She began discussing the details with me. This report won't be approved if you take everything by yourself. We need to modify it and give our partners the opportunity to receive benefits as well. This way, it maximizes the available benefits for everyone. In that case, even if we don't do anything ourselves, they'll carry out this plan on their own. After all you care about is the final result, right? Then it might not be a bad idea to let go of your total control over your plan. If you're too greedy and want all the profits, you need to be careful of the veteran true god swatting you to death. As expected of someone her age, she was truly experienced. She was definitely someone who couldn't be judged based on her physical appearance. With her assistance, my plan's success rate was now projected to have increased by 30%. And now that we finished working out the final kinks, we began writing the report. And, when we submitted the report, the skies were already lighting up. Who was the report for? Martial arts harem story protagonist mass production plan? One day later, when Ayer looked through the thick letter that Wumian sent him, even he paused in surprise for several minutes. As long as I intentionally thought about something and focused on it, I could transmit my thoughts to Wumian's because of my connection with him. Then, Wumians would logically process whether this plan was workable and effective enough. If Wumians decided that the plan was beneficial for itself and law, he would naturally accept it and carry out the plan. And now that the plan had arrived in Ayer's hands, it doubtlessly meant that Wumians by himself was unable to carry out this plan single-handedly. Assistance from other gods was necessary. How insane! Yet, it seems like it just might work. Elliot, write letters to Patricia, Cadio, and Benny. The message should be that our little bro has a nice idea, and we're finally going to have a chance at some fun. Perhaps you all will even have the chance to become main gods. But, after some hesitation, Ayer stopped his own subordinate. Forget it, call them over here for a discussion instead. Aaron, increase the guard level of the Death God's divine kingdom. We need to keep things top secret here. Otherwise, the Order gods might have an internal conflict first, which won't be fun. Little Roland, you're giving me something mega troublesome here. Hey, it seems like I won't be bored anymore for some time. Of course, I didn't know that this plan gives certain gods major headaches, nor did I know about an endless upcoming series of discussions among the true gods that would test their wisdom and experience. Right now, what I still had to deal with was the severe situation in the Bardi Empire. A large amount of grains had been tainted with Gasolin's tears. The moment some large-scale undead magic spell was activated, the consequences would be immeasurably immense. But, who cares? It has nothing to do with me. I'm not a hero who's going to save the world. As for saving the people, let's give that job over to the Holy Church. Besides, with the situation as terrible as it is already, it's impossible to do anything about it even if I wanted to. Even I, a several hundred-year-old Chonobiu, knew that some things were simply impossible to do. This was a situation where the undead emperors had prepared for several decades. Trying now to forcibly do something would be no different from jumping directly into a pit naked and fighting against the undead emperors. It would be suicidal. Besides, there weren't any solutions in the small details, either. The people here had already consumed these grains for over a decade. If I told them now that there was a problem with their food, even if I proved it for them, I would cause nothing other than mass-scale panic and the undead emperor's premature activation of their plan, since I didn't have any way to rectify the foundational changes in their body. Of course, there would also be a mass famine. The Bardi people had probably long since discarded their original grain seeds. Slaughter entire cities? Let's not mention the fact that the undead calamity hadn't arrived yet. Even if it arrived, with the entire country like this, where would I even start slaughtering from? And if I slaughtered cities, that would be perfect for the undead emperors to start summoning undead, and I would even be made out to be the evil one. So, since the problem was already huge to the point of no recovery, that meant that it was actually easy to deal with. At any rate, I decided to not care about it anymore and just do what I needed to do. I also reported about the undead emperor's plot in my report to the gods. It was their turn to worry about such things. Yep, I did such an excellent job in tossing the responsibility to others. I refused to be responsible for solving this problem. Well, of course we had to make some changes ourselves as well. At the very least, from today onwards, Nobody in my group was going to be eating any more local barley grains anymore. Of course, Harlois and I were exceptions, as the Casolan's tears would be excellent for our bodies. Since we discovered all this, I unhesitatingly left Baron Matt's domain the moment the sky lit up. With the situation at such a terrible state, the undead had probably secretly taken control over the entire country decades ago without the humans realizing it. Continuing to idly travel about in the Bardi Empire had lost its meaning. While on the road, I did an experiment with Carolyn and some other Bardi citizens' blood but found out something rather unexpected. Everyone from the capital possessed at least 3 times the amount of Casolan's tears in their body compared to the locals here. It would seem that the people in the capital had started eating these grains much earlier, so they were poisoned more deeply. Still, once again, there was nothing we could do. From now on, we would follow the original plan to continue down this tour of inspection, extorting nobles to enrich our wallets while slowly making our way to Port Victoria. But that was obviously impossible. Not every noble was one with needs like Baron Matt's. Most local domain lords acted just like emperors within their own territories, and it was only natural that they felt enmity and on guard towards centralized authority. And, the farther out from the capital a location was, the stronger the belief in holy light. It was only natural that there would be enmity towards the undead. Still, we were supposedly the Imperial envoy group that represented Emperor Orlos. On the surface, they treated us quite politely. Despite the warm welcomes, however, there was always a sense of distance between us. Wherever we went, we would be stared at with looks filled with enmity. This caused us to feel complex emotions. In a way, this was a good thing, as it meant that the Bardi Empire wasn't a rock-solid nation with high internal unity. At the very least, these areas far away from the capital still had their own way of thinking. However, always being treated with such enmity was an unpleasant experience. And, when we finally arrived as planned at the road intersection leading to Port Victoria, we heaved huge sighs of relief. This was a new territory that the Bardi Empire recently obtained, so its control in this area wasn't quite as strong. Even if something really happened, we had confidence in our ability to escape. But, the moment that we stopped at a local earl's residence, we heard 2 pieces of headline news. First was that Pope Kaloma had formally set a date for the holy war against Emperor Orlos. The Pope requested for all the countries that believed in the holy light to send out armies within the time limit of 2 months, all to organize a holy army which would formally fight against the Bardi Empire. The Pope probably became even more determined due to the news we sent out from here. The second piece of headline news was quite visible, without even needing to hear about it. Under the distant white clouds, the attention-catching sight of volcanoes erupting explained everything already. The fact that we could sense earthquakes and the rampaging of earth and fire elementals from over 1,000 kilometers away was indisputable evidence. A forbidden spell. And it's even a double forbidden spell with dual elements of earth and fire. The news was quite simple, but the content made me contemplate much about it. The Mage Country was the first to accept Pope Kaloma's summons in declaring formal battle against the Bardi Empire. With their very first attack, the Mage Country used a forbidden spell to assail one of the Bardi Empire's major forts, Fort Florset. The Bardi Empire suffered major losses, losing over 100,000 elite military forces that were defending this fort. And, for the sake of revenge, the Bardi Empire's ace of aces troop, their Dragon Knight squad, had now entered combat. An epic level battle between archmages and huge dragons was soon about to begin, with all-out war between these 2 mega countries having broken out. Ike's 7 Hells, Prologue, The Whispering of Demons has ended. The times are moving forward. Chapter 1, The Vultures of Battle has temporarily been sealed due to your efforts in creating peace and unity in the underground world. Scene 3, The Despairing Calamity, has now been prematurely activated. System reminder, what's scheduled to arrive will always arrive. Notes, 1, TL/N, mat and the Chinese word for toilet are phonetically similar in Chinese. Chapter 275, Dragon Knight Archduke. Night Rain City was formerly the capital of the 17-nation New Moon Alliance, but it was now only a small border town in the Bardi Empire. However, the person in charge here was the Archduke Dragon Knight, Hayland Winston, of the Bardi Empire. Pretty much all mega empires would have their very own ace military squadrons that had amassed countless years of history and service. The most famous military squadron of the Bardi Empire would be its Dragon Knight Squadron. The massive dragons were forever at the top of the food chain. They were also one of the few gold-ranked species that existed in this world. A mature adult dragon, even at its weakest, would be the equivalent of any human at the gold rank. Once a dragon learned some basic hunting techniques and magic spells, even the average legend-ranked warrior would be helpless against these flying beasts. After all, dragons knew how to fly, while ordinary warriors would be stuck on the ground, unable to do anything. Dragon Knight contracts were typically contracts between some strong warrior and a dragon as either master and servant or as equal status companions. Basically, the dragons would only give recognition to the strong, but that created an obvious paradox. The weak that needed the power of dragons were unable to obtain their recognition, while the strong that obtained the dragon's recognition didn't need the dragon's power to begin with. Dragon Knights hence became legends in their own right quite easily. That was why even if once in a while, one or two weak humans managed to gain a dragon's recognition through some coincidental fate or lucky occurrence, they were only exceptions to the norm. With the decrease in humanity's average combat strength, Dragon Knights, which were considered the strongest of all aerial knights, grew fewer and fewer as well. It was already quite difficult for a strong country to maintain more than one or two Dragon Knights, and it was common for the dragons in question to be young, immature dragons hired with large amounts of money. The dragon's actual power and will to fight would be questionable. However, there was one country that had always remained an exception. In the Bardi Empire, the number of Dragon Knights had never fallen before 50. Even the weakest Dragon Knight would be at the gold rank. Yet it was incomprehensible why they were able to so easily obtain the dragon's recognition. Some people said that the Bardi Empire obtained a secret artifact from the dragon gods, while others said that they had a long-lasting contract with the dragon species. But no matter what the truth was, due to the existence of a large number of Dragon Knights, the skies would never belong to any of the Bardi Empire's enemies. This was also one of the main reasons why the Åland Empire put so much into the development of floating combat airships. They treated the Dragon Knights as a potential enemy and threat. Hayland Winston was the sub-commander of the Dragon Knight Squadron, as the commander would always be a member of the royalty, so the current commander was Emperor Orlas. He was a famous warrior who was ranked in the top 10 in all of Bardi as well as 67th in the Ike's famous warrior rankings, as the Archduke Dragon Knight. In this current generation, the Bardi Empire possessed a total of 72 Dragon Knights. Only 60 out of the 72 would be sent out on campaigns, and these 60 were split up into 12 small teams of 5 each. Hayland personally commanded 5 small teams, a total of 25 Dragon Knights. Setting his personal status aside, his personal combat strength was similarly astonishing. And his dragon steed was the adult blue dragon, dark and cloudy windstorms Sishuzler, and was quite renowned amongst the dragons. Hayland reached the legend rank as a warrior 10 years ago and possessed a legendary artifact called the Thunder Horn. He had the astonishing military achievement of single-handedly slaying over 100 Griffin Knights in a single battle, and he was a famed fierce warrior throughout all the lands. 1 year ago, he quietly left the capital of the Bardi Empire and took all the Dragon Knights under his command to Night Rain City, which caused quite a commotion at the time. As a former capital, Night Rain City was a classic example of a well-fortified city. But ever since Archduke Hayland started living here, not only did he bring a large number of military personnel with him, but he even personally invested a great amount of money and resources into the city's fortifications. Numerous cannons and towers were constructed, while the city's walls were reinforced many times over. At first, everyone here found it quite strange. After all, constructing a well-defended fort meant that there would be some type of enemy to defend against. There were no other countries even close to Night Rain City. Hayland's actions seemed rather meaningless. However, after the Port Victoria incident occurred, since Night Rain City was close to Port Victoria as well as located on the only road to Port Victoria, everyone learned just what Archduke Hayland had been on guard against: the undead. While the Bardi nobles were still shocked at Archduke Hayland's decision to leave the capital and come here, He managed to completely eradicate all traces of bandits in the nearby vicinity in just the short time of less than 1 year. And due to the fact that huge dragons could constantly be seen in the skies above the city, Night Rain City received a new name, Dragon Rain City. The moment we arrived in Dragon Rain City, a sudden rainstorm blotted out the skies, making it more convenient for us to enter. Since said Archduke Hayland was also from the capital, I was worried that we would run into him and he might see through Lilith's disguise, so I had Carolyn and Lilith switch identities with each other, with Carolyn being herself and Lilith being the maid. Now that Carolyn was playing the part of herself again, there was no more worry about authenticity. But if at all possible, I didn't want to have to meet this famous Archduke Dragon Knight. So, my plan was to enter Dragon Rain City as inconspicuously as possible and obtain information first before deciding whether or not I should try meeting with this Archduke. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that it was on the only road to Port Victoria, I wouldn't have even passed by this city if I could help it. Carolyn, what do you know about that Hayland? Have you ever met him? He's a bit scary. Carolyn, who was busy hugging her maid Lilith, took quite a while to answer my question, and her tone of voice contained an inexplicable amount of fear and anxiety. It was as if she was recalling something terrifying. After finally hearing everything from her through all that stuttering, I learned the basic view that Bardi nobles had of Archduke Hayland. He never participated in any noble parties, nor did he ever hold any social events. If he absolutely had to participate in some formal event, he would always join while wearing military attire. He was even daring to the point of wearing his sword in the presence of Emperor Orlos. With losses were gains to be made elsewhere. Although he antagonized many nobles, he was deeply approved by the military leadership and civilian military officers. He was a powerful figure and representative of the military faction. As for why Carolyn was so scared of him, it turned out to be because her father, who was the Duke equivalent to Duke Hayland in rank at a time when he hadn't been promoted to Archduke yet, had requested the then Duke Hayland to teach swordsmanship to his daughter and son. This was obviously supposed to be a way for nobles to establish closer relationships and friendly ties with each other. However, Hayland took it at face value and strictly trained Carolyn and her younger brother as seriously as possible. He forced full military standards for their training, and the two siblings that were used to an idle lifestyle suffered terribly. Later, even when Carolyn's father requested that Hayland go easy on them, Hayland still maintained his way of thinking. Go easy on them? Since they're currently my subordinates, I can't possibly allow them to be insufficient as military personnel. Even if Emperor Orlos himself requests me, my answer is still the same. You only have two choices: complete the training tasks, or die. Hayland had a seemingly soft and gentle voice that reverberated throughout the garden, but for some unknown reason, nobody in Carolyn's family dared look at him directly. There was an invisible might about him that seemed like a huge dragon was surveilling its own territory. There's no mistaking it, that's draconic might. I came to a simple conclusion after hearing this description from Carolyn. While the Bardi Empire's Dragon Knights might be considered a mystery in the eyes of the general populace, there were plenty of things that were revealed about them after all these years if you knew where to look. First of all, their Dragon Knights were basically hereditary in position, passed down between family members. Not only that, it could be learned from fighting with them that most of these Dragon Knights weren't pure humans. Most of them had dragon's blood in them, and they were the descendants of dragons. Unlike the magically created dragons, dragon descendants were far stronger from the time of their birth. Most of them had a true dragon as an ancestor, and they were typically able to inherit part of dragon's strength and natural talents, which made them quite difficult to deal with. The fact that the Bardi Empire's Dragon Knights were the descendants of dragons might be a secret to the general populace, but it was an open secret in the Society of the Strong. The real secret that remained unknown was how the Bardi Empire successfully kept the dragon descendants in their human country for so long, along with how these dragon descendants became Dragon Knights. Of course, since dragon descendants possessed the blood of dragons, it would indeed be much easier for them to obtain the friendship of dragons. However, friendship was one thing, and having a dragon serve you was another. After all, would you allow a distant relative of yours to ride on you and command you as they pleased? And if the dragon descendants married ordinary humans, the power of their bloodline would naturally dilute and decrease. It would only take a few generations for them to be no different from ordinary humans. Just how the Bardi Empire was able to maintain the dragon descendants' bloodline for the past thousands of years was yet another mystery. To be honest, when I heard all this, I wanted even less to meet with this legend-ranked Archduke. After all, one of the most common natural talents to dragons was the Eye of Truth, which specialized in seeing through all sorts of illusions and disguises. It was impossible to fool, scam, or lie to Little Red. If we met a dragon descendant who possessed such an ability, all our secrets would likely be seen through immediately. But, right now, I was in no mood to think about the secrets of the Bardi Empire's dragon descendants. After all, if anyone had been struck by a heavy sword, sent flying, and become embedded in the city wall like me, I'm sure that they wouldn't be able to think comfortably, either. 1 minute ago, the city gate opened and a not very tall figure blocked our procession amid the torrential downpour. With large thrums, rain pounded and glanced off his gape, and his naturally curly blonde hair maintained its own uniqueness despite the rain. His golden eyes were glaring at me with a draconic might that would make any living creature tremble. Archduke Haland. When Carolyn muttered our visitor's name out loud, I was still thinking of what light to say when in the very next moment, he swung that heavy iron blade of his, which was the same height as him, right onto my body. I didn't even have time to react yet when I was sent flying several dozen meters and embedded into the city wall. I said before that filthy undead are forbidden from entering my city. Those who dare to enter shall die. He spoke gently and softly, just like Caitlin had told me in her story. However, not a single person would doubt his will to carry through what he just said. Since he only attacked the Lich in our party, perhaps that would leave room for negotiation, but someone had already lost control of himself as he transformed his killing intent into an actual threat. You dare to hit my father. Adang, who had been slowly following our procession, had mostly been snoozing, but he suddenly flew into a furious rage. The next moment, his originally large body suddenly expanded to more than 10 times in size. An abomination taller than the city walls appeared in front of everyone. It was now Halen's turn to be astonished. There was no mistaking the aura of the strong, and the giant abomination before him was definitely no ordinary abomination. It pressured him far more than this legend-ranked Lich that he had just sent flying. Could the undead have some plot here? But even though Adang's tremendous foot was about to stomp on Haland, Haland remained calm. He knew that his old partner wouldn't allow him to be in danger. Smack! Before Adang was able to stomp down, something heavy crashed into him. That heavy something was a blue dragon that descended from the sky. Thunderbolts were whirling around it, and the out-of-control thunder all around it made it seem all the more fearsome. A blue dragon on a rainy night would be at its strongest, as blue dragons were favored by wind and lightning. Damn it, where did such a monster come from? But, the seemingly fierce huge dragon wasn't actually having it easy. It already lost a piece of its flesh from where it touched Adang, as it suffered due to the abomination's skin containing saws that could devour flesh and bone. Upon contact, Adang's skin had bitten off a piece of the blue dragon's skin. Adang is going to eat you. The furious Adang didn't intend to hold back as he distorted his body once more and transformed into the most frightening nightmare of all, a gigantic dragon spider, the hunter of dragons. With just a single exchange of blows, the elder blue dragon transformed into an insignificant existence that was viciously sent flying with a single swat. However, the Dragon Knight Archduke remained calm. His battle horn attached to his waist was already at his mouth. Since the undead were openly declaring war on him, what came next wouldn't be a small battle. Instead, it would be a battle between the undead and the Dragon Knights. Adang, retreat. As for me, I was absolutely furious. I didn't care if he was an undead or a Dragon Knight. Since he hit my face, I was obviously going to hit back. My mana went berserk and transformed into a black mist that twirled around me, with the power of death becoming my pitch black shadow. That was my servant which would bring death for me, and I felt that I seemed really like the boss of a video game now that I was immersed in the darkness. I hadn't been so pitiful in receiving an attack in such a long time. The only part where I still maintained my sense of reason was to continue my pretense of being a Lich and only fighting back with a Lich's magic. Roland, I think something's wrong with this situation. Let's stop for a moment and calm down. Harlois was warning me now, But did I really need this silly cat to remind me? It was apparent that something was wrong with the situation. Even though we secretly sneaked in, Hayland immediately found and attacked us. Something was obviously wrong. I'm quite calm, and I shall calmly kill him. The ender of everything, the frigid winter shall arrive. Tremendous ice magic power was gathering on my arm, while my cyan soul fire transformed into pale white icy flames. I was always one who gave what I got back, so since Hayland sliced me up as a way of greeting me, then it was only natural that he allowed me to use some combat magic to greet him in return. Is this your way of calming down? Do you calm down with your knee and not your brain? Hayland saw how the torrential rain in the sky instantly turned into snowflakes and wondered for the first time today if he should have just stayed home. Perhaps he came looking for the wrong person. Chapter 276, Clash. The unique structure of the nearby mountains along with the climate and the forces of nature caused Night Rain City to be a place where rain clouds commonly gathered. Night Rain City was on the mountainside, but the origin of this rather poetic name lied in the fierce rainstorms that typically came at night when it was colder. Militarily speaking, there was a height advantage offered by this city's construction, and the rainy weather gave it an advantage in defense. Slippery mountain slopes would make it difficult for anyone to use siege weaponry. After all, under Hayland's command, the entire nearby mountain was being carved out by humans, and this fortress city was expanding at a fearsome rate. Judging by its current rate of expansion, it would likely become a peerless impenetrable fortress within the next 2 years. However, what the city guards at the city gate witnessed today was a snowy night that should have been extinct in spring. It was not the typical rainy evening. First, the snowflakes came down as tiny specks. Then, the snow gradually grew larger in size until it imperceptibly became a flurry so heavy that it was impossible to even see one's fingers in. The area around the Lich had transformed into snowy ground. Changing the environment with one's mana doubtlessly meant that this Lich was an incredible archmage, perhaps even at the saint rank, yet, so what? No matter how strong, have we ever feared anyone? Hayland's heavy sword was trembling, but that was due to his excitement, not fear. After sensing that his opponent was powerful, this draconic warrior had found a worthwhile prey. He let out a low roar, causing all his muscles to naturally overload themselves, as if he was a predator about to hunt his prey. Fool! He uttered a magical incantation that caused his heavy sword to swirl with blue-white electricity. When the lightning flashes illuminated his face, Hayland, who was filled with the will to fight, now had his overly clean face appear more resolute than before. His heavy sword was now enchanted with dragon magic with the properties of thunder and summoned lightning bolts with every swing, further increasing his might by approximately 30%. And not far away, dark and cloudy windstorms Zishuzler viciously glared at the transformed Dang. He flapped his wings, intending to begin a new round of attacks against Dang. However, a light foot suddenly pressed down on his head. He didn't even notice its presence until it was already there. Young one, if you don't want to die, I recommend that you don't move. On his head was a young human female. However, the blue dragon's sense told him that her pressure was like a mountain. Dragons were a species that had their levels etched into their bloodlines, and this venerated blue dragon felt true terror for the first time in his life. This was an upper-ranked draconic might that even an elder blue dragon was unable to resist. A dragon queen of some colored dragon? An immemorial dragon? Elder dragons, ancient dragons, and immemorial dragons. Each type of dragon required thousands of years as the base unit, and there were tremendous differences in power among their ranks. The huge difference in draconic might caused the elder blue dragon to be unable to do anything at all except surrender. No one would believe it. The famous Dragon Knight Archduke and his blue dragon were completely suppressed right from the very start of fighting against some complete unknowns. Meanwhile, I was enjoying my battle against Hayland. Ice Pillar. I didn't use any incantations, and there weren't even any mana waves sent out from me. My bony middle finger had a ray of white light following it, and right after that, it transformed into a cone-shaped piece of ice as tremendous as Dragon Breath would be. With this right before him, Hayland's expression didn't change at all. He unhesitatingly swung his sword and clashed against the pillar of ice, which forcibly transformed the ice back into snowflakes. That thunder-enchanted sparkling sword of his sliced through my icy attack with surprising ease. A special anti-magic ability? It doesn't seem to be an effect of the sword's enchantment but rather a natural talent ability. When fighting with dragon, demon, or god's descendants, apart from having to be on guard against their base stats, which would be much higher than an ordinary human's, what one needed to be more vigilant about would be their wide assortment of natural talent abilities that were ever so difficult to defend against. Snap! With a snap of my fingers, yet another high-speed ice pillar appeared from the ground to stab at the dragon knight who was rushing at me. He lowered his head, protected his face, and used his shoulder in lieu of a spear to charge through my ice. Boom! The heavy sword-wielding knight didn't stop at all and actually crashed through my ice pillar. However, judging from the tattered pieces of his armor and fresh blood on his forehead, he didn't have an easy time. Yet Hayland knew that keeping a distance from an archmage who had such a degree of expertise in ice magic would be tantamount to suicide. Only the courageous who took difficult paths would be able to win. Even if he injured himself, he would force himself closer to me. You actually like charging through head-on? Alright then, I shall allow you to enjoy yourself to your heart's content. Come, ice wall. I clapped and caused numerous walls of ice to rise between me and the path he was taking to charge at me. With such an amount of snow falling here, this place had already become my domain and battlefield. How is this possible? Does this Lich not need any casting time at all or mana replenishment? Even though the cold-faced Hayland remained calm on the surface, he found it incomprehensible how this unfamiliar mage was able to cast magic spells that seemed to break all common sense. But even so, he believed in his own victory. I'm within 5 meters. Any battle between a mage and a warrior would eternally be about controlling the distance. Even a mage 2 ranks above a warrior in power level would easily die if the warrior managed to close the gap to melee distance. Ice circle. I was getting more and more used to my own powers as I fought Hayland. Although I was still shouting out the names of common ice magic spells, I was actually only using the most basic ice sculpting. Elemental sculpting appeared simple but was actually marvelous in its countless applications. I just had to use the easiest elemental sculpting of all to construct a model of what I wanted and pay the mana cost required to have all the basic ice element move into place. Making this one part horizontal would be an ice wall, while making that part vertical would be an ice pillar. Or drawing it in a circular fashion would create an ice circle. Unlike the rigid movements of casting spells I did in the past, the ice and snow here were extensions of my will and my body. It was basically no different from me physically fighting. Swoosh! This time, I swung my fist in midair at nothing, and with another swing, an invisible fist of snow suddenly landed upon Hayland without any warning at an angle above him. It was impossible for him to notice. It forcefully hammered Hayland into the ground. Oh my, that looked like it really hurt. The settling dust revealed a large hole in the ground with stone shards scattered everywhere. Just like what had happened to me earlier, Hayland didn't even get the opportunity to shout before he was buried in the ground. My massive hand of ice and snow began dissipating as well. If you only judged by its outer appearance, it looked like the high circle ice magic for manipulation, Balof's fist, but it was actually just basic ice sculpting as well. Although this ice sculpting magic was on a slightly larger scale than others, it was still only an insignificant drain on my mana. After knowing the foundations, everything would be easier. Before, when I cast magic, I was just imitating mages before me. An analogy would be that someone taught me how 1 plus 1 equals 2, and I managed to go up to 10 plus 10 equals 20. However, the current me was at the level of knowing the formulas for how everything worked, so I could easily change basic magic spells templates as I pleased. Forming into solids is the most critical part of gathering the ice element. Although it's sturdy and sharp, its speed is much slower. If I want quicker speed, I only need to gather smaller particles. If I want to shoot out rays or mist, then I also need to calculate the reacting force. In my hands that appeared to be a Lich's bony hands were large amounts of ice, snow, and singing and dancing ice spirits. Under the influence of my mana, they constantly transformed into mist, or ice pillars, or invisible, tasteless frost. Their forms, conditions, and sizes were no problem at all. They could change themselves at will. With only a thought, I could twist common sense and take so many shortcuts with unnecessary processes. After casting off the restraints of common sense, this completely unreasonable magic of mine which defied common sense was my foundational magic that I could control at will. Oh my, this is so fun! As if I had found a fun toy to play with, I wholeheartedly threw myself into the manipulation of my snow and ice magic. I even sent my own spells against myself to test them, almost forgetting about my opponent who was that really famous Dragon Knight Archduke Kling. Well, I almost forgot about him. This painful sounding clang was the sound of his head crashing against the solid walls of ice encapsulating him. That poor little dragon descendant. I hoped that he wouldn't get a concussion for this. It would be bad if he injured himself too badly and left some dark history in his heart. Or, should I make him hit himself in the head a few hundred more times so that he would lose his memory? HMPH. So easy. All you can do is dig some holes and attempt ambushing me from underground. How many battles do you think I've had against sandworms so far? I long since froze the entire surface of the ground here. I'll simply wait for you to crash into more walls of ice. From the moment Haland cast a thunder magic enchantment on his sword, I knew that he was most likely of a blue dragon's bloodline himself. And blue dragons excelled at controlling lightning and thunder and also really loved to build their nests in deserts and isolated hills. They were naturally skilled diggers. Their natural talents involved the ability to move through sand as well as underground, so how could I possibly not be on guard? The snow kept increasing in magnitude. Although I wasn't at the level of being able to create my own soul world yet, all my preparations for what I wanted to do were now complete. I transformed all of my mana into the purest ice element. All this ice element would be the paint for drawing the Northland scenery, while my fundamental magic, ice sculpting, would act as my brush. The reoccurrence of my world of snow and ice was under completion. Snow continued to blanket the ground. A small portion of the snow was transforming into a snow mountain, while magical crystal trees could faintly be seen. When looking at it from a distance, it was probably just a beautiful scene of snow. But just like the winter in the Northlands, death traps typically waited, hidden in such clean and beautiful scenery. If a traveler who was allured by the scenery and didn't understand the natural laws of snowy mountains acted as he pleased, then that traveler would likely not live to see next year's spring. This is my Ice Strider Soul imprint. Wow, it's really so suitable for me. I apologize for not allowing you to display your true power until today. The snowflakes in the air could transform into fatal ice blades at any time, while the accumulated snow on the ground would suddenly collapse or freeze over. The layers of ice beneath the snow would silently form ice blades as well, and the sunlight reflecting off the snow would begin creating white illusions. With a single misstep, one had the potential of dropping into an endless abyss, sleeping forevermore amongst the pristine snow. With the ice element continuously falling together with the snow, the ordinary streets transformed into snow mountains. This would seemingly take a lot of mana, but, in reality, all it took for me to summon the ice and snow was a small amount. Since the scenes of snow were already drawn by me, what I had to do after was slowly enjoy. As I expected, fighting in actual combat with an opponent who is close to my level was an excellent shortcut for improving myself. In the past, all my opponents' power levels were completely unbalanced compared to me. Either they were ridiculously strong to the point where I couldn't win unless I cheated, or they were so weak that I could easily win with one hand tied behind my back. With me being forced to use only ice magic to fight in order to maintain my disguise as a lich, this was the closest even battle that I hadn't had for so long. It helped my many years of accumulated knowledge as well as recently learned knowledge explode all at once, transforming into practical combat strength via real battle. I could feel that deep in my soul. The newly reassembled Ice Strider Soul imprint was beginning to glow. It was becoming stronger by feeding on a silvery light. However, it seemed much smaller than before, probably only about 1/4 of its original size. One person only has one soul, which means only one soul imprint. Do I have to have all 4 of my abilities reach the level required in order for me to enter legend rank? I didn't need to say any more, nor did I need to search for a reason. It was as if the heavens had revealed something to me. I already knew that if I wanted to enter legend rank, I would need to summon 4 soul imprints in total and progress even further than in the past. Others only need to reach a sufficient level of understanding once, while I need to reach it 4 times. And I even need to combine all the powers at the end? What type of hellish difficulty is this? Forget about ice magic. I went down the wrong path before, and now I've corrected myself and made improvements. But as for law, holy light, and undead magic, my mastery of these areas is almost at the top of the world already. How am I supposed to progress in these areas? Why is it that for me to enter legend rank feels more difficult than for others to enter semi-god rank? I had confirmed my future path of personal development but kept complaining endlessly. I was also beginning to burn up with a nameless anger. After all, I was no masochist who loved taking the most difficult paths, so of course I would object to the mysteriously high difficulty for me to progress in rank. Yet, I still knew that the harder it was, the greater the benefits to be reaped at the end. There was no such thing as luck on the path of cultivation. It would be only natural that there would be even larger benefits at the end when I broke through these obstacles. Since I had to work 4 times harder than others, I wouldn't request for 10 times the rewards in the end, but it wouldn't be too greedy to want 5 times the rewards, would it? Ice Shredder Soul Imprint has been completely activated. Your ice magic's effects have been improved by 20%, and mana costs have been decreased by 20%. You have now obtained the passive ability, Lord of Frigid Winter. System reminder, your opponent is still fine, so stop daydreaming. Lord of Frigid Winter, passive ability. Whenever you're in an environment with plentiful ice and snow, you shall become the Lord of Ice and Snow, which will greatly increase your ability to control these 2 elements. Once you finish constructing a cycle of ice and snow element in the surrounding area, the entire area shall be viewed as your personal domain. Only a minor amount of mana is required to maintain your domain of ice and snow, and along my improvement in understanding, my soul imprint was completely activated. With its assistance, the snowflakes increased a little in size yet again, and it became easier for me to control the minute details of everything. It didn't seem to have much impact, but it improved my general abilities and changed me at the foundation. When 2 people were battling, if one person suddenly became stronger, it was only natural that his opponent would be the unlucky one. After this entire area around us fell under my control, all the ice and snow in a radius of 100 meters acted as my ears. How could that little lizard underground possibly escape my senses? Ha! Roland's heavy fist. A fist of ice and snow crashed down, smashing on the Dragon Knight's head right when he popped out from the ground. He could only swallow his anger and pop back underground again. When his blue dragon saw that its master was at a disadvantage, it started angrily roaring and struggled to get back up, but Little Red, who was sitting on his head, stomped down once, causing the blue dragon to writhe in agony and lay collapsed in its place. As for me, I kept loudly shouting out the names of my spells while having fun playing whack-a-mole. Since these were completely self-created magics, based on mages' habits, I had the right to name these spells as the creator. And adding the spell's inventor's name into the spell was considered one of the greatest honors for a mage. I was quite jealous of Harlow's Shadow Steps and Amelia's fruit-growing spell for quite a long time already, and now that I had the chance, of course I would take the opportunity to enjoy myself. Roland's Ice Arrow, Roland's Ice Blade, Roland's Multi-Type Ice Bomb. Haha, I'm not an idiot mage. I want to take 10 of you on at once. Since he had failed in his ambush from underground, it was only natural that Halen would have to return to the surface if he wanted to overturn the situation. I kept smashing all sorts of ice magic down at him. It was just like playing whack-a-mole with the Dragon Knight as the mole. Just as I was proudly thinking about how I should get my spells' names patented, that silly cat actually ruined my fun yet again. Roland, new magic spells require new magical reasoning and absolutely unique spell models. What do you think your spells are? Alright then. Although it was easy enough to fool novices, it was impossible to fool another mage. While I was just randomly making names up, these seemingly different spells were actually all variations of a one-circle magic spell, Ice Sculpting. Even though it was extremely powerful at restraining and controlling my opponent's actions as well as extremely low in mana costs, It was still only a basic form of magic. The fact that the Dragon Knight had taken so many direct attacks but still hadn't died was the best evidence that it lacked attack power and still needed improvement. You call yourself a Dragon Knight when being so skilled at escaping? I think you should change your name to Cockroach Knight. A large patch of snow and ice transformed into a gigantic ice blade and split the earth, directly threatening Archduke Haaland, who was underground. The most dangerous part of all wasn't even the endlessly spreading ice and snow, it was the fact that this ice blade began spreading like a large tree's roots. It would soon be able to capture its prey. It's obvious that Roland's just venting his anger now. I think that he's gotten angry out of embarrassment. And he calls himself an old adult, but whenever he's displeased, he takes it out on others. How immature. And he even dares to call others immature. Alright then, I decided to pretend not to hear my own companions making fun of me. Actually, this battle that had started for no apparent reason was basically at its end. While it was a fact that any typical mage would be defeated by a warrior in just a second if the mage allowed the warrior to close the distance, most situations were actually like this one. The warrior would be pulled into the mage's way of battling, and even if the warriors had peerless physical strength, it would be useless unless he could close the distance. The warrior would eventually fatigue and be defeated while being fought with, and if the current situation continued, the ice would eventually pierce through the very ground itself and freeze all the earth around us, which would naturally seal off his natural talent ability to move underground. At that time, he'd find it impossible to even leave the ground. This is the Dragon Knight Archduke? Although it's to be expected, isn't he a little too disappointing? However, Harlois seemed to have gotten addicted to going against me all the time and immediately countered my statement. Don't make it sound so easy. With your personal equipment plus your frigid winter's bonuses, do you think there will be any difference even if your opponent is a Saint Rank? That youngster was quite unfortunate, as his speed was continually slowed down in the snow by Uri's Calamity's chill stacking effect. He was also foolish enough to crash straight through your ice while using his body. With how many stacks of speed reduction that are probably on him, his body's time sensory system is probably all messed up now, and we're moving at 3 times the normal speed of what he sees. As expected of the bloodline of the speediest blue dragons, though, it's already incredible that he's still capable of dodging your magic attacks. Harlois then seemed to recall something that made her quite displeased. That ability of yours is just so insidious. Especially the Ice Calamity's chill that can slow down sensory perception of time, as anyone who doesn't know about it beforehand will definitely fall for it. Oh, I forgot about it already. So there was that as well. That means this guy's normal speed is 3 times what he's displaying now? How dangerous. Although I was saying it was dangerous, I didn't treat it as anything important at all. However, there were always people who couldn't be judged by common sense. What suddenly happened next proved Harlois' wisdom correct. No matter how much she warned me about the Dragon Knight's skills, I had still underestimated this dragon descendant I was fighting with. Haaland jumped out of the ground, angrily roaring and accompanied by rampaging thunder. In order to more conveniently attack the underground opponent, the ground there would unfreeze for a split second when the ice blade inserted itself into the ground. Even though it was only a gap of a few milliseconds, Haaland actually managed to leap out of the ground in that short instant together with the dirt around him. The thunderbolts he sent out along with his furious roar broke my descending ice blade to pieces, while his glaring eyes seemed to breathe fire at me. The next moment, I understood how it was that he had managed to grab that millisecond chance to successfully break out from underground despite the fact that he had been repeatedly slowed. Haaland must have used his heavy sword at that moment to suddenly wield it forcefully behind him, crashing into the earth. He then used the power of reactive force to help propel himself out of the ground. So it was reactive force. I immediately realized that he must have discovered the slowing effect on him. Although he didn't know how to get rid of it, he thought of an idea of his own. Since he was currently slowed, why not use reactive force to help propel him out? Reactive force wouldn't be affected by the slowing. When his speed had been slowed to 1/3 already, doing this and managing to catch a millisecond opportunity truly wouldn't be easy. That would require an almost bestial instinct along with a calculative prowess on the level of premonition. Even without paying attention to any of that, Helen's ability to adapt when forced to the brink was truly something. But I unhurriedly muttered an incantation. With such a distance between us, I had long since prepared a dimensional door spell. I increased the distance between us again and continued my game of whack-a-mole. Ame. The dragon descendant used his own ace as he uttered an incantation and tossed down his heavy sword. Wings suddenly unfurled from his back, and blue streaks of lightning twirled around him. He shot himself directly towards me at top speed, showing off his own natural talent ability as the bloodline of the speedy blue dragons. The next instant, his blood-red eyes were right in front of me. "It's over. It's over." Both dragons said the exact same words. Helen's blue dragon had a delighted tone, while Little Red shrugged as if she was bored and didn't care about the result at all. As for me, I laughed at the shiny Helen filled with lightning. I merely reached out to empty air, causing the heavy top-quality metal mage staff which weighed almost a few tons to materialize in my hands. Then, I lowered my head, twisted my body, and wielded my staff at the person using his own body as a cannon shot to attack me. Home run swing. Hup! What manner of monster is this? Take my staff. However, nobody responded to my ripping off of Journey to the West. I indeed made an excellent home run swing, and Haaland went flying backwards at twice the speed he came. He crashed into the city wall. Yes, the city wall. He completely and utterly sunk into the city wall, causing an entire portion of the wall to collapse. He was even more pitiful than me from earlier. Ha, I'm white-robed Gandalf, I mean Rex. I'm skilled at magic, and my mastery of staves is even better. Who said that mages don't know martial arts? Hit. You want to compare strength with me? You're 200 years too young. Normal dragons would only have 25 points or so in strength, while a dragon descendant would probably have at most 23 in strength. And ever since I equipped that armlet I received from Imrita Lorcan, my strength value surpassed the barrier of 30, which put us on completely different levels. Yet, I didn't have the free time to continue laughing at the person I just defeated. Perhaps I had made too much of a spectacle of things. Or maybe Haaland had some special method to contact his allies. While I was busy playing with Haaland, we were now surrounded by his allies that had arrived under the cover of the weather. Currently, there were over 10 visible dragons flying around and perched on the city walls. Who knew how many more were waiting in the shadows? Vicious glares gathered in my direction, while those threatening dragons flew circles in midair. The dragons weren't impatient. They had plenty of time to enjoy the thrill of the hunt against a strong opponent. Should I say that it's my honor? I met an entire Dragon Knight squadron right from the start. Sigh, this is really such a strange battle for no apparent reason. But, before I could even consider how to deal with all this, an ancient-sounding voice spoke up in midair. Along with it, a silver dragon descended. "Your Highness Fina? Aren't you Her Highness Princess Fina?" "Young ones, what are you all doing? Stop our attacking formation. This is Princess Fina, someone who carries true Bardi royal blood. I'm Jonan, your Knight Captain Guard." Hearing this, Lilith trembled with a face filled with disbelief. She didn't expect to meet a familiar face here. But, since this Jonan was a dragon descendant, it was only natural since 1 or 200 years was nothing to a dragon's lifespan. Lilith took a huge step back and seemed to instinctively want to escape. However, when she thought about Amelia, whose fate was currently unknown, and how that we couldn't avoid Night Train City no matter what since the situation had developed in this manner already, she gritted her teeth and nodded, admitting her identity. "Earl Jonan? It's been such a long time, but please call me Lilith now." Note: 1. TL/N, Sun Wukong's favorite quote when attacking monsters in Journey to the West. Chapter 277, Secret and a Letter. The heavy rain battered the rooftops and didn't seem to show any signs of slowing down. According to the time, it should have almost been light outside, but there was nothing other than the misty blanket of rain that obscured everything. Spring rains before dawn were always nice and calming. Listening to the rain outside, sitting by a fireplace and enjoying a cup of hot cocoa that truly warmed the body made that fierce battle just earlier seem only a dream. Alright then, let's pretend that the Dragon Knight Archduke who was glaring at me didn't exist. Meanwhile, I was quite angry at the fact that nobody gave me a cup of hot cocoa. This was clear discrimination against the undead. Even if you received one, would you be able to drink it? If someone really gave you one, wouldn't you just complain that they were making fun of you? Silly cat, leave your cup for me. Hey, don't even think about it. Due to Lilith's sudden appearance, the originally tense situation was instantly diffused. After all, the Dragon Knight Jonan was once her personal guard, and in regards to seniority, Hayland would need to call Jonan second grandpa. It was all a misunderstanding to begin with, and since neither side had anyone that was seriously injured or killed during the misunderstanding, it was easy enough to explain it. Even if the undead were able to appease the nobles in the capital, they weren't able to appease the dragons and dragon knights. It was quite obvious that the dragon knights weren't going to get along with the undead. And since Hayland was a powerful faction of his own in the dragon knight squad, the fact that he moved to Night Train City and took it over was in a way his resistance against Emperor Orlos's will. Archduke Hayland of Night Train City had famously declared before that he didn't care about any consequences, as long as any undead dared to enter his territory, they would be instantly executed with no mercy given. And not long after he said that, we arrived without knowing about it. Hearing this, I wanted to crash my head into a wall. Perhaps I really should make some free time to go donate some money to the God of Fate's church. At the very least, I wanted to get rid of some of my misfortune. Especially after hearing that in this time period, Archduke Hayland personally patrolled the city walls to search for undead, which meant that I might have still made it past his eyes if I hid myself in a carriage. But I just happened to be sitting on a horse and leading our procession so grandly as the Lich Rex. All the scouts on the city walls saw me instantly and pointed me out, which was basically a direct challenge against the Dragon Knight Archduke's authority. How could he possibly ignore me? And, so, everything that happened after came only naturally. The part where I was slightly surprised about was that the Dragon Knights seemed to be quite clear about Lilith's identity as well as that she was a member of the Blood Tribe, but they didn't show one sign of disrespect or enmity towards her. As for that Earl Jonan, who seemed middle-aged but was definitely well over 200 years old, his expression seemed far too complex as he looked at Lilith. His emotions included reverence, relief, pain, and so on. The numerous complex emotions and speed at which his expression changed made me sigh and think that he could definitely change careers and become an actor. After all, we were all present back in the day. Although it's not my place to criticize that emperor who was Amelia's father, and what he did to Her Highness Amelia. Sigh. The elderly knight kept reminiscing about nostalgic things, while Lilith was the one who remained calm, as if she didn't even notice the high-spirited dragon knights in front of her. She merely led Carolyn, who had an expression of not knowing what was going on around everywhere, to eat some desserts, taste some tea, enjoy the warmth of the fire, relax their bodies, and resist against the chilly weather. I had investigated the matter of Lilith's incident before as well. After Phina Milan became the Blood Tribe member, Lilith Milan, that perverted necrophile Prince Sinat, was killed off not long after. After that, the throne was given to a child between Prince Sinat and one of the Bardi royalty side family's daughters, which basically broke off the Bardi Empire's direct royal blood succession. If you forcefully tried to find someone, Amelia counted as the person having the most Bardi royal blood out of anyone left alive today, but nobody in the Bardi Empire would dare to make this ridiculously senior princess from so many generations ago take the throne, not to mention bring up the topic of having children for the sake of the royal bloodline. This was something from just 100-ish years ago, and the retainers from back then were now mostly dead of old age. Whoever ruled had the power to write history, and the so-called direct bloodline would only refer to the emperor's bloodline at the time anyways. 3 generations later, who would remember an emperor from more than 3 generations ago? While normal people wouldn't remember, the Dragon Knights and Dragon descendants from that year were still living quite well. They believed in the chivalry code of knights and still recalled the ruler they had sworn loyalty to so long ago. Now that they saw that their princess who had gone missing over 100 years ago was living quite fine, of course they would be filled with excitement. It was also thanks to Lilith's status that me and my undead were invited inside as well. Otherwise, even if we were so-called imperial envoys, that wouldn't matter to Archduke Hayland. If the Lich Rex had been executed, all that would be said was that he deserved it. After all, Orlos wouldn't dare to directly go against the Dragon Knights for the sake of a simple Lich. After spending a short time together with them, it was easy to tell from the way they treated each other that rather than acting like a military squadron, They were more like a big family. That Jonan could use his seniority to lecture Hayland for being overly hasty. When seeing how that icy-faced handsome Hayland could only helplessly listen and not even defend himself, I felt like I was watching a naughty child receive a scolding from his parent. And, when I looked around the room, the famous Archduke Hayland wasn't even the strongest Dragon Knight here. There were several Dragon Knights with stronger draconic might than him. For example, that elder of his, Jonan, was obviously a saint. Could it be that your Highness Fina is here for the sake of the undead? Jonan's expression was filled with hesitation, but from his position, there were some things he absolutely had to ask. Everyone in the Bardi Empire knew that the Dragon Knight Squadron didn't get along with the undead, as how could the prideful dragons possibly listen to the commands of the filthy undead? But the current Princess Fina before them was now also an undead vampire. Although it seemed like she probably wasn't related to the undead in the Bardi Empire's capital, they still needed to ascertain her motives in coming here with the Lich. Hearing his question, Lilith directly shook her head. I said already, I'm currently Lilith, a member of the Church of Law. I'm no longer Fina Milan. I don't want to meddle in the affairs of the Bardi Empire, nor do I have the power to do so. This time, we came here for a different reason. As for the Lich, she looked over at me questioningly. The question in her beautiful eyes was quite obvious. Should I tell them the truth or not? Do you want to talk to them from here, or should I continue speaking? I nodded without saying anything. Although the saying that an enemy's enemy is a potential friend might not always be correct, it was probably better to explain things to them rather than being misunderstood as the undead emperor's subordinates. Otherwise, we'd probably have an unsolvable conflict on our hands where we'd just break out into an all-out fight, again, and that would make it impossible for us to pass this fortress city peacefully. This person who was just beating up Archduke Hayland is actually the famously petty Roland missed. Before she even finished speaking, Hayland suddenly stood up with incredibly obvious shock and disbelief on his face. He obviously knew my name. I lightly twisted the magical ring on my hand, and a radiance shot out from it that removed my illusionary disguise. The moment I regained the appearance of my physical body, I instantly stole my silly cat's cup of hot cocoa and downed it all in one gulp. Being able to enjoy delectable foods and drinks rather than only being able to watch felt so much better. The silly cat grit her teeth in anger, but she knew that this wasn't a good time to take revenge on me. The undying Roland? Yang I, the evil undying king. Even though she told them my real identity, this seemed to make the Dragon Knights more on guard against me, not less. Even that Jonan placed his hand directly on his sword. Was my reputation that bad? As the only undead emperor in the past 1,000 years, not to mention how you've become the representative of all demon kings in the recent centuries' fairy tales, shouldn't you have a little more self-awareness? After all, you're ranked number 27 on the Calamity rankings, dear Roland. Indeed, my companion Harlois who's ranked number 46 on the same Calamity rankings. Thank you so much for your reminder. I've heard that due to our recent actions, even though you've disappeared from in front of everyone for so long already, your ranking has even managed to increase. How does it feel for people to fear you even more simply because you haven't appeared? It's my misfortune as a teacher. I should have kicked you out and refused you as my student from the very start. Although I kept up my serious appearance, I was actually messing around with Harlois like always through our soul connection. However, the Dragon Knights weren't calm at all since they had their own information channels and naturally knew that Roland Mist was also Emperor Yang I, the only recent undead emperor. Has he joined up with the other undead emperors? I heard that he was causing some major incidents in the Northlands, so what's he doing here? The more famous you were, the more you were feared or respected. In the eyes of dragons, no matter how venerated a mortal was, that would all be short and temporary. Those that truly deserved respect or even fear were of course the undying that took slow steps to the peak of power. And anyone on the Calamity rankings would unmistakably be considered monsters. That abomination just now was the carnivore. Ah dang! I managed to escape with my life. The blue dragon Sishuzler, who had currently transformed into a bulky man's appearance, was getting scared now. There were more than 1 or 2 dragons that had died to this famed Zuyuo warrior already. In front of an all-out Adang, even an ancient dragon would be nothing more than some food which might get stuck in his teeth. Killing a slightly famous mature dragon would be nothing to Adang. By the way, I should mention that one of Adang's forms was also on the calamity rankings. It was just that very few people knew that it was him. And, actually, if it wasn't for me stopping him, Adang would have easily killed that Sishuzler with a single blow in their battle. At first, the Dragon Knights thought that they would have the overwhelming advantage, which was why they calmly welcomed these unwelcome guests inside their own fortress city. But just this former undead emperor alone gave them no chance of victory at all from the very start. It would seem that we were instead the ones going easy on the Dragon Knight squadron that seemed to have the advantage of numbers. Lilith continued her own introduction of me as if she hadn't noticed the sudden tension in the atmosphere at all. Yep, he's Aunt Amelia's good friend as well as disciple. This time, we came here to help Aunt Amelia. Relax, this time, at least, we're probably on the same side. I don't exactly have friendly relations with those undead that came here uninvited. Lady Amelia? The person who asked so concernedly was a rather tall female dragon knight who had blonde hair and green eyes. There were obvious silver dragon scales on her forehead and even 2 small curved dragon horns. No wonder she would always wear a full helmet when outside. I recalled her to be a dragon knight from several generations ago named Lucia. Seeing how concerned she was, she must have had some sort of connection to Amelia. Yes, at the time, Aunt Amelia and I were both at Port Victoria. I was immune to the dimensional descent that occurred there because of my undead body, but Aunt Amelia stayed behind. How is that possible? How could Lady Amelia? The female knight Lucia had an expression of astonishment, as if she couldn't believe something catastrophic could befall Amelia. Calamities typically live the longest, and Amelia is fine, I can promise. She's probably just having some trouble, which is why we're here. Can we pass through now? I took up the topic here, since my patience and time both had limits. We were quite close to our goal of Port Victoria now, so if the situation permitted it, I wanted to leave as soon as possible. I thought that after saying things so directly, it would be quite easy for them to let us pass, but the end result was that they all looked at each other awkwardly. It would seem that it would be a problem. After passing Night Train City, it would take another 2 weeks or so of traveling on foot to reach Port Victoria. However, this road that was easily taken in the past had transformed into a black earth that was poisonous for the living. The faint stench of corrosion would make people want to throw up, and the formerly flourishing port was now completely desolate. Thick clouds forever covered the skies, and even the crows, which were considered unlucky, all died, collapsed on the ground. This place had become a forbidden zone for the living. Once, there was a pack of wild wolves that were being chased by a tremendous semi-dragon, forced to the brink. Not long after entering this forbidden zone consisting of black earth, however, they started running slower and slower before finally collapsing. And not long after the wolves, the stronger semi-dragon predator collapsed as well, and the undead added a pack of zombie wolves and a bone semi-dragon to their number. Actually, according to the undead emperor's original plan, if they succeeded in completely opening the dimensional door, the area around Port Victoria wouldn't be affected very much even if Port Victoria itself was sacrificed. This was also why Orlos finally agreed to this plan, but due to certain reasons, there was a change in the situation. Just as how underground plumbing pipes would always erupt with filthy water if they were blocked somewhere, the power of the undead plane that found itself blocked by the magical forest changed its direction in which to corrode. Nobody would be able to tolerate this domain filled with the power of death other than the undead. Although they became stronger in this domain, the undead themselves were feeling quite anxious about it. After all, the Dragon Knights had sent them an ultimatum: the moment this undead domain crossed into human territory, or, more specifically, Night Rain City's territory, it would be tantamount to a declaration of war on the Dragon Knights. This midway region between Night Train City and Port Victoria had become a buffer zone. Every day, huge dragons and gargoyles would perform surveillance from the skies. Of course, whenever they met each other, Some additional broken gargoyles would then appear on the ground. Not a single sane merchant group would choose to enter this type of area. The moment we left Night Train City and headed for Port Victoria, the undead would probably discover it. If we didn't want to put the undead on guard against us, that meant there was basically zero possibility of speedily passing through this area. We could only take things slowly and try obtaining more information. It would be best if we could somehow contact Amelia again. I didn't lie at all, as I truly believed that Amelia would be fine. And just as we finished our discussion, before I even got to rest up, Little Red came looking for me with a mysterious look on her face that seemed like she could barely hold in her laughter. She must have found out something interesting that she intended to share with me. "Hey, Roland, would you like to know why they have so many dragon descendants? And about what's going on with their dragon knights? Isn't that the Bardi Empire's secret? You know it? DSK, what secret?" I understood immediately with a single look. "Didn't you notice how that Hayland and his dragon Sishuzler resemble each other greatly? In appearance and smell, they resemble each other by over 90%. They're definitely twins." I recalled how that Sishuzler preferred to transform into a buff and muscular man, while that Hayland was so handsome. They were supposed to be twins? I suddenly felt as if there were problems with Dragon's sense of aesthetics. Wait a moment, Dragon's sense of aesthetics? That means to say, in a dragon's eyes, the two of them basically look like twin brothers. Alright then, I understand what's going on now. No wonder all those dragon descendants were of the same bloodline as their dragons. So they were all close relatives. No wonder Little Red was snickering. If this was revealed, it would become a scandal for the surface dragons. Dragon descendants typically came about as a result of dragons breeding with other creatures that weren't dragons. In the mortal plane, all sorts of semi-dragons' bloodlines were considered quite valuable for research purposes. There was truth to the saying that dragons were true to their base desires, as sometimes they bred with others for reasons other than affection. In such a situation, the byproduct of half-blood dragon descendants would find it difficult to receive their parents' true love. Still, it was obvious that the dragon descendants couldn't just be left alone. If a dragon descendant used his or her natural powers to do something like take revenge on society, not only would that humiliate the dragon descendants' irresponsible parents, the entire dragon species would feel humiliated. That is to say, that so-called Dragon Knight Squadron is actually a type of daycare. Dragon descendants that had a sufficient amount of dragon bloodline in them were able to transform into true dragons after undergoing a bloodline ritual and paying a price, as well as receiving their bloodline, their parents, assistance. But the prerequisite was that the dragon descendant needed to be strong enough, most likely a minimum of the gold rank, and also needed to be a certain age. Dragon descendants matured far slower than normal humans and would require a relatively safe environment to grow up in. It would also be easier for them to obtain experience and wisdom in the complex human society. No wonder this Dragon Knight Squadron never lacked young dragon descendants. It would seem that any irresponsible dragon parents that didn't want to raise their children would bring them here to this Dragon Knight Squadron. The young, long-lived dragon descendants would learn from and be brainwashed by the knightly chivalric code here, so they wouldn't do anything foolish. As for those dragons they got to ride, they were all their brothers and sisters and so on that came to accompany their siblings for this slow period before they matured. Spending a few decades or a century or two to play with one's own little brother or sister wasn't much to a dragon. My guess was that for the dragon descendants without siblings, there would still be an unlucky dragon from the same bloodline sent to protect the dragon descendant, which would count as a small trial for the dragon. And since they were mostly closely related siblings to begin with, riding on each other wouldn't matter. Ha ha. No wonder they're all novices. So they were all unlucky ones that had to raise young children. What are you looking at there? Oh, an old dragon gave me this letter, telling me it's from someone I know. Cherry? Such a strange name. Little Red, do you know this person? Chapter 278, Changes. I casually tore open the letter's seal before I discovered that it was actually the highest level magical seal of all, inscribed into the gray letter with wax runes. If anyone other than the letter's intended recipient had opened it, the letter within the envelope would have destroyed itself or possibly even exploded. Cherry? I don't know this name. Yep, you've never mentioned it before. Although Little Red was continually shaking her head, there was laughter in her eyes. Even though dragons typically look down on needing to lie, Based on my understanding of her, her expression meant that she was waiting to see something interesting, and asking her would be meaningless. And, so, I unhesitatingly opened up the letter's envelope ever so slightly and put it down on the table. Then, I stood at the doorway, and used a hand device to open it up from a safe enough distance. Ha ha, I'm too smart. If only the bomb disposal technicians in my previous world had magic techniques like mine, there wouldn't need to be so many sacrifices. Wah ha 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 ha. I completely ignored that dragon who was intending to watch me make a fool of myself and laughing to the point of clutching her stomach. For some reason, when I saw this name Cherry that resembled an elven name, there was an itch in my mind that seemed to be instinctively warning me that this name was trouble and that I should be cautious. In order to avoid any traps, I carefully hid behind the door and cancelled my magic hand device the moment I used it to open the letter, and then, are you joking with me? Nothing actually happened. There was no sudden flash of white light, nor was there the wailing of a banshee. There was definitely no explosion and not even some floating white or green powder. At the very least, shouldn't it contain a death curse? For a scare letter to not even contain a single trap, how unprofessional. Ha ha ha. You're so funny, just what are you doing? Face-a-kecking the bush? Using your own feet to check for traps? 1. Alright then. I decided to continue ignoring that dragon who was rolling around on the floor in laughter as I picked up the letter only to see a few simple sentences. The ancient elven language. Someone's actually using this language in this day and age? Let me think. How do I read this again? The letter was written in the ancient language of elves that had long since gone extinct. It would have been normal for the letter writer to use the common human language or the dragon language, but what was with using the ancient elven language? Was this Cherry an archaeologist? The words were written quite beautifully and cleanly. It was evident that a female wrote them, but the content was so perplexing that I couldn't understand it all. You dare to return? When I read this out loud to check my grammar, I was certain that I hadn't made any mistakes translating the ancient elven language. But why was it that I still didn't understand what the letter writer meant? Was this supposed to be a complaint aimed at me? But, just as I finished speaking out loud, the letter suddenly glowed white, and then, damn it, it was actually the type that activated upon reading it out loud. Boom. The letter indeed exploded. Well, at least the explosion wasn't a powerful one, but it brought a strange smoke with it. When the smoke finally dissipated, I was covered in something blue all over. Cough, cough. She actually intentionally used the difficult ancient elven language to fool me into reading it out loud, which would cause the letter to explode. So evil. Cough, cough, cough. I didn't know what this trap was made of. Even the dust I coughed up was blue. The only part I could feel lucky about was that I could sense this trap was apparently non-toxic. Ha ha ha. I knew it. The female dragon behind me was rolling around on the floor in laughter even more vigorously. She seemed to have expected this. And what accompanied this trap was a sudden flash that jumped outside the room. Apparently, with the letters opening, something left that informed the trap's setter that this letter has been activated as she planned. And at the same time that I was smeared with blue all over, a small pendant dropped onto the ground. This was a heart-shaped sapphire that was glowing with a clear radiance, just like the moonlight. Seeing all this, I knew that this was only the beginning. The truly troublesome part would probably be waiting for me down the road. Such a targeted trap aimed just for me, it's impossible to believe that she's someone I don't know. Since I was unable to recall who Cherry was, that made me even more worried. All of this was obviously aimed at me personally, so it could only be someone highly familiar with me. Why was it that I couldn't recall this name at all? Well, not having any impressions of someone was normal, since after so many lives, I'd already forgotten so many things even about myself. But, for even my memory library to not have any records, that was quite abnormal. After thinking about it extensively, I came up with only two possibilities. Either at the time, I hadn't started recording my diaries yet. I could basically ignore this possibility, though. That left only something that I intentionally didn't want to record, not wanting to remember certain things, hoping that I would completely forget about it after reincarnating. Well, if I can't recall it, I'll just stop bothering. Since it was something I intentionally wanted to forget, it's obvious that it's better to not remember. I directly decided to forget about all this, which caused Little Red, who still wanted to see my antics, to become displeased. "You sure live such a carefree life. If you can't remember, you're just going to give up on remembering? Such an envious lifestyle attitude you have. Aren't you worried at all that there's going to be some trouble waiting for you if you can't remember?" "There's nothing I can do about it if I can't remember. Besides, if this cherry person wants to come looking for trouble, even if I remember, won't she still come looking for trouble anyways? It'll only add more to my plate. Since she's an enemy, I'll just have to deal with things when the time comes." "Isn't she simply an old acquaintance?" "The number of old acquaintances I have that want me dead could probably make a long enough line to reach from here to the Western Ocean. Why would I be afraid?" Although I said so, I secretly increased the defenses around our rooms. Of course, it wasn't entirely just to guard against an unknown threat. When the next morning arrived peacefully, I was reassured slightly. Although the Dragon Knights acted quite respectfully towards Lilith, and knights were typically a bunch of dullards that only thought about knightly chivalry in their tin can brains, we were still technically in enemy territory, and we needed to take extra cautions. Being on guard was something absolutely necessary. And as we talked to the Dragon Knights, I obtained information about the Bardi Empire that I had really been lacking. Local domain lords' information was too outdated compared to the Dragon Knights, who received updated news from the capital every single day. With the ambitious tyrant ruler Orlos still perfectly holding on to his power, the current Bardi Empire was indeed in Orlos's grasp. However, even if everything appeared calm on the surface, there were torrents brewing in secret. With the old emperor continually increasing in age, the situation in the Bardi Empire only kept increasing in complexity. Although Emperor Orlos was still considered the overwhelming authority, just about everyone hoped for his death. This especially included his 10 or so still living adopted princes. Although they all seemed pure and kind on the surface, they all had large factions of their own and were waiting to fight it out for the throne after Orlos's death. Of course, none of them dared yet to make any military moves, yep, at least on the surface. Some of the princes' wives' families seemed to be trying to butter up the military factions, though. As for local domain lords, does it even need saying? There would forever be insolvable conflicts between centralized royal authority and local domain lords. Although Orlos's method of forcing all the domain lords to send him their eldest sons to the capital as hostages was quite effective, it also worsened the relationship between the royal authority and the domain lords. This method had been put into practice for 20 years now, and the first batch of domain lords' eldest sons had already grown into adults. However, those that returned to their domains to inherit the position of domain lord were pitifully few. This wasn't because of Orlos refusing to let them go, but instead because most domain lords had chosen their second sons that weren't hostages at the capital. No second son? They would just do their best to give birth to a second son, then. As for the second sons who got to be the domain lord, they wouldn't have any feelings of friendship whatsoever towards their older brothers that should have legally been the domain lord. Those that truly welcomed the firstborn son back to inherit the domain lord title were fewer than few. The overwhelming power that the royal authority possessed had caused many complaints to accumulate. And since all these complaints had accumulated, they would definitely explode one day, sooner or later. After Emperor Orlos's death, no matter who it was that managed to seize the throne, there would be no way that person would have sufficient authority to suppress all the domain lords anymore. It could be said that due to the overly centralized power of a royal authority, all the domain lords had been repressing their ambitions for the past several decades. They were all looking forward to this emperor, who was pressuring them from above, to die of old age so that they could rise up again. Simply judging by how everyone was reacting to the emperor's alliance with the undead, there were plenty of internal disagreements in the Bardi Empire just on this topic alone. Although Orlos used his authority to forcibly suppress most nobles' distaste for this, the lack of total unity on this subject caused plenty of internal factions to be formed. Apart from all the gods' churches that directly broke with the Bardi Empire, the fiercest reaction regarding the undead were from the royal mages. The first day that an official announcement was made regarding the alliance with the undead, the head royal archmage winced, decided to take a sick leave. All the other royal archmages also began to shut themselves inside and work only on researching magic. The Dragon Knight Archduke Hayland and his Dragon Knights leaving the capital as a form of protest was already considered to be a softer form of protest compared to some. While Hayland and his Dragon Knights were using their own method to protest their dissatisfaction against Emperor Orlos's policies, at the western border, there was a group of Dragon Knights that remained loyal to the Emperor. These Dragon Knights were about to enter the battlefield and begin taking revenge upon the Mage country. Dragon descendants had a special status. First of all, most of them were half-dragons and could be considered both dragon and human. Yet since they spent most of their lives growing up in a human empire, they were quite attached to their identity as humans during their growth period. As they had the status as knights, they felt it was only natural for them to participate when their emperor gave the command to go to war. If at all possible, I didn't wish to see an all-out war between two mega empires, especially since the Mage country was intimately connected to me. That strange quest I received a while back that forced me to choose between improving my reputation level and either the Mage country or the Bardi Empire was probably evidence, even way back then, that the upcoming war between the two countries was inevitable and that I would have to choose a side. I could already guess that when I arrived at the Cloud Tower to continue this so-called main storyline quest, I would likely be forced to formally choose a side in this war and participate in the battle. I hope that these Dragon Knights here won't join the war. That would escalate the war's level immediately. The undead invasion is already beginning, and the longer we stall for time, the better our preparations will be and the greater our chances of victory. Both countries sending in all their high-level combat strength immediately will only benefit the undead that are going to come sooner or later. I was considering about more than just these issues. Giving the Bardi Empire over to the undead emperors seemed like too much of a waste. Since the Bardi Empire had an unstable internal situation, perhaps something would change from within if I managed to stall for time. For example, if Emperor Orlos finally suddenly died, there was a high likelihood of the new ruler directly turning against the undead. Congratulations to host for activating the secret side quest. Prevent the Dragon Knight squadron from entering this meaningless battle. Quest requirements: stall this Dragon Knight squadron from entering the battle as long as possible. If you successfully stall them for 3 months, that will complete this quest. Quest reward: a clue to the location of the former Dragon Queen Molly. Quest failure punishment: Little Red's anger. System reminder: just continue wasting your time doing side quests. You want fate points? Never. It would seem that many things related to the main storyline quest of the two major countries at war could be activated as side quests. Although there weren't any fate points as rewards, based on what I knew, I couldn't leave even a single small detail uncovered in order to properly finish a major storyline quest. Accumulating as many benefits as possible would leave me on the safe side and would be the most reliable way of all to win. Something worth mentioning was that although many people rolled eyes at us in disbelief when I warned them about the upcoming undead invasion, after the undead truly arrived, these countries still pretended to act mute and deaf about it on the surface but secretly sent us many envoys hoping to receive relevant information and assistance from us. Of course, I exaggerated things as much as I could and pointed out all the undead invasion points that were recorded in history. As for whether or not anything would be changed, that would have nothing to do with me. In history, the Bardi Empire was one of the largest invasion points of all. After the undead launched their full-scale invasion, the mega empire formerly known as the Bardi Empire was completely destroyed in the short time of only 3 months. This was doubtlessly something unimaginable, but after organizing everything that I knew about the Bardi Empire, I learned of the many internal and external threats to it. I suddenly felt like it being able to survive 3 months would be incredible already. History didn't record in detail what happened to the Dragon Knights, but there were records stating that after the Bardi Empire succumbed to the undead, large amount of bone dragons appeared. If I extrapolated based on the current situation, then even if these Dragon Knights didn't die against the Mage country, they would probably die later against the undead's invasion. It was to be expected that every single one of them would die off. But, right now, it would be no easy feat to stop these Dragon Knights from entering battle. After all, we were still foreigners to them and could even be somewhat considered as enemies. Even if Lilith tried convincing them, The effectiveness of her words was unknown. And since they were Barty's knights, as long as Emperor Orlos formally gave an edict for them to fight the Mage Country, there would be no reason they could refuse unless Hayland and the others wanted to be labeled as traitors to the Empire. Especially since they're going to be under the impression that it's all for injustice and to take revenge for the Mage Country's premature attack. Unless, of course, we can prove that the Emperor is already insane or has committed some crimes that severely go against their code of chivalry. But when I realized this, I laughed out loud. Didn't Orlos commit plenty of such crimes? Casolin's tears will be the best evidence of all. It seems that I need to go have a chat with Hayland. Right, the Dragon Knights would probably join the battle against the Mage Country to take revenge for that forbidden spell. But why do I feel like this isn't the Mage Country's style? I should investigate this as well. Note, 1, ed/n, Urban Dictionary explains kicking the bush well. I quote, in a video game, to gather information on an area hidden in fog of war by charging in. To check for enemies with your face. Seems to have originated in League of Legends, where vision obscuring bushes allow champions to wait hidden from view in very close proximity to their opponents. Chapter 279, Reunion between old friends. Rain would typically leave the air fresh. The sudden north wind, however, brought with it a rotten, uncomfortable stench. The spring rain was unable to wash away the scent of death in the air. For the new residents here, this was the smell of their home, and they hoped for this entire world to be distorted into becoming part of the undead plains. Yet the magical forest beside the former Port Victoria remained an impenetrable fortress. The open dimensional door stayed an ongoing threat. Right outside Port Victoria were several dozen colossal soul-summoning towers, endlessly gathering the power of death magic to distort this area. They transformed into pillars of black light that covered the skies. Surrounding these towering pillars of black light was a patch of distorted space. Within it, mountains, water, and a thick mass of ethereal shadows doing something could be discerned. This was where the mortal plane intersected with the desecration plane, and undead were entering the mortal plane here every moment. With mountains of body parts piled up beside them, the Liches were busy at work. Upon arrival, most low-level undead would be missing a limb and required spare parts to be installed so that they could walk normally. When any high-level undead arrived, the first thing they would do was thank the heavens and the god of fate's protection for arriving safely. Overlapping dimensions would cause their dimensional laws to clash with each other, and moving between them was akin to attempting to navigate through a dangerous waterway in a thunderstorm with only a wooden board. It required not only courage and power but luck more than anything else. The undead emperors weren't idiots and were well aware that this was a critical moment. They had, in fact, spent numerous efforts and prepared endless plans just for this day, but no matter how complete one's preparations were, nothing could resist sudden misfortune. Judging from the current development, if this dimensional descent ended up creating an entirely new mini-dimension, then the dimensional door leading to the desecration plane would have been completely wasted. A severe situation was now in front of the undead. It was only by destroying this newly born dimensional will that this area would be completely swallowed up by the desecration plane. If the will awakened, it would begin a major counterattack which would render this dimensional door useless. Find a new location for dimensional descent? First of all, how would the undead convince the Barty Empire to make another huge sacrifice of its citizens when the undead hadn't even achieved any combat results to show yet? The undead emperor also had paid a tremendous price and risked personally descending upon the mortal plane in order to negotiate for it last time. And even if the undead were able to suppress the Barty Empire's negative opinions, the preparations they made at Port Victoria had taken far more than just 1 or 2 years. In order to reach the level required for a dimensional descent, the soul summoning towers had been secretly active for many years, and the local citizens possessed more than 5 times the normal of Casolan steers in their bodies. How many years would it take the undead to prepare another such location for dimensional descent? And it just so happened that when dimensions were clashing against each other, dimensional teleportation would be like trying to pull a good fortune rather than a bad one. Low-level undead were cheap and plentiful, and there were countless low-level undead of all sorts in the undead plains. It wouldn't be considered a pity even if only 30% of the low-level undead made it across, but it would be a huge pity for mid-level undead and above. In the mortal plane, There was no such concept as mid-level undead. Undead without intelligence were considered low-level, while those with intelligence were considered high-level. However, in many undead planes, since the dimensional laws there were tilted in favor of the undead, progressing to a certain rank, about bronze or so, would cause the undead to regain their experience and intelligence. Their overwhelming numbers was a large reason why the undead countries in the undead planes flourished far more than outsiders realized. There was even a high degree of culture. No intelligent life form would be able to tolerate itself being transformed back into a beast ruled by its instincts. Since mid-level undead were considered as people back in their home undead planes, how could they be willing to become beasts and slaves again over here? Mid-level undead that lost their intelligence would be nothing more than slightly stronger low-level undead, and their true power would be reduced to less than 1/3. This was quite an obvious waste. High-level undead were probably the most pitiful of all if you only look at their rate of birth. That made them all the more precious. The saying that undead armies lacked high-level commanders more than anything else was quite true. And using thousands of years of accumulation to gamble on a single probability in dimensional teleportation was far too bad of a deal. Of course, the more powerful the existence, the better the odds of survival. It was only natural that they would have a higher rate of surviving the dimensional teleportation. Yet if they were unlucky and met with something like a time fissure, then even an undead emperor wouldn't have the confidence to make it through the dimensional teleportation. No matter how much of a price they paid, the highest chance they had was only at 50%. Gambling thousands of years of accumulation on only a 50% probability was tantamount to a definite loss. But since the battle was at a critical junction, things like downsides and probabilities were ignored. Even if we lose everything, we have to take the strategic objective became the rallying call of the undead. It was quite obvious that the now flattened hills weren't worth trading all those undead lives for, and even if they conquered it, it wouldn't really bring them any benefits. The most important part was the strategic meaning behind it, as being unable to conquer it or conquering it too slowly would both mean an imbalance in the overall battle situation. And right now, this half-sealed new dimension that was becoming more and more independent was the strategic objective in question. The Order gods were likely to intervene at any moment, even though the undead emperors knew that using dimensional teleportation at the current time was incredibly disadvantageous. They still sent in everything they had when they discovered that the newly born dimension was beginning to escape their control. Ah, I've arrived. I can see things here. I shall conquer. Roar. A lucky zombie just managed to walk out of a black pillar of light, but he didn't even have the time to celebrate how he was lucky enough to make it here before he lowered his head and pitifully howled. A large amount of black mist left his body, taking with it his hundreds of years of experience and wisdom. He was just talking really big, but the next moment he'd become a drooling zombie. He had become a low-level undead, only interested in crouching on the ground and chewing bones. Yet another unlucky fool that was brought here without understanding the situation. A Lich connected the zombie to itself with a death contract and ordered it to move out of the way. This type of occurrence was exceedingly common these days, and the Liches had gotten used to it already. What arrived next was a Death Knight squadron that was injured and tattered all over. Many of them had broken hands or broken feet, and they all supported each other as they barely managed to hobble out of the pillar. Judging by how they were able to maintain their intelligence, they were all high-level undead. They were considered elite reinforcements and major personages, so a Lich immediately came over to heal them and register them for military organizing. The Bloodthorn Knights have all arrived. I'm the leader, Alba. The leader of this knight squadron was actually a Death Knight Lord on the level of an undead lord. The Lich cast Death Breath to help heal Alba as he registered the squad's arrival, but before finishing the registration, he hesitated. He couldn't help but ask a question. All arrived? Aren't the Bloodthorn Knights that incredibly famous knight squadron in the White Demon Valley district? I've heard that there should be over 100 high-level undead knights. The Lich was unable to say anything further as a pale white arm grabbed onto the Lich's skull. The Death Knight Alba's face was filled with anger. Snap. Should things be described as everyone was happy in the end? The Lich proved the old saying of why it was suicidal to speak when you shouldn't, and the Death Knight Lord that lost so many of his subordinates found a target to vent his anger on. But, when Alba took a look at his brothers in arms behind him that were mostly dead and heavily injured, he couldn't feel any satisfaction from having vented his anger at all. Without even arriving on the battlefield, our 136 knights had become 13. That damned also. Damned dimensional fissures. And damned this fate. But even if he complained, what could he do? That wouldn't change anything about his destiny to be cannon fodder. Since the undead emperors had resolved themselves to pay any sacrifice necessary, even the undead lords were unable to escape their unlucky fates. While normal dimensional teleportation worked at a success rate of 40%, that was just an average obtained from countless amounts of 0% and 100%. There were many who were unlucky, like the Bloodthorn Knights who just happened to meet with a dimensional space-time fissure and become an unlucky group that had less than a 10% survival rate. Even if he cursed the undead emperors that forced them into teleporting here, it wouldn't change a thing. They were the invaders here in the mortal plane, and they could only take this path to the end. This heavily injured Death Knight squadron was taken to the Soul Summoning Towers for additional healing, and then these Death Knight's national talent and commanding soldiers would be put to use. They would have to help organize mid and low level undead for their armies. As long as there was a sufficient number of skeletons and zombies, each Death Knight was basically capable of leading an entire army. Plants vs. Zombies continued outside, with the battles on the front line never ending. But if one paid close attention to the combat situation, one would notice that the undead had practically stopped sending out any more high-level undead elites to deal with the forest. Numerous structures were being built around the Soul Summoning Towers, with large amounts of undead laborers working overtime on them. Fortress-level defense lines would soon be completed. Since the power of numbers was unable to deal any damage to the forest's combat strength and instead only acted as its experience for growing stronger, not a single intelligent commander would fight this meaningless battle any longer. The campgrounds were filled with reinforcement soldiers that had just arrived from the desecration plane. It was obvious that the undead were accumulating their total forces for a large-scale attack. The small skirmishes with the forest were nothing more than sending out extra and needed scouts. Meanwhile, the wood spirits didn't seem like they were going to come out and proactively attack. After all, as a newly born species, they would suffer a massive decrease in power upon leaving the forest. Attacking the undead's campgrounds meant leaving their home dimension, and they would lose their ability to remain undying. It was only natural for them to not have the ability to proactively attack. The wood spirits were quite worried as well as they watched the undead continually gather more and more in number. But they couldn't do anything other than continually improve their defense lines, produce more of their own, and develop new weapons for combat. For the undead, only having strength in numbers would be insufficient. The limitations in dimensional laws prevented the undead emperors from descending here and retaining full power. Their direct subordinates were too strong as well, and it would be quite difficult for them to descend. Without a complete descent, the amount of usable power they'd have would be questionable. Yet while it was unfeasible for them, it was indeed fine for others. I never thought I would return so quickly. The Lich Feynman strode out of a pillar into the mortal plane. As he exclaimed about how mysterious the world was in its ways, he casually took some bones from a Lich beside him in order to restore his lower half that had been destroyed during the dimensional teleportation. Although Feynman was unlucky enough to meet a dimensional fissure just like the Bloodthorn Knights before him, he had extra protections given to him specially by Undead Emperor Osso and successfully made it through. As an undead lord that entered the Mithrink while in the mortal plane as well as one of the strongest undead in all of Ike, the former second senator from Zeluo, Feynman, indeed had the right to be proud of himself. Although he finally ended up on the losing side in Zeluo's internal conflict, he was still well trusted and relied on by the undead emperors as one of the potential vanguard leaders familiar with the world of Ike. He was even taken in as a disciple by Undead Emperor Osso, and he learned many undead secret techniques along with the chance to understand the basic fundamental dimensional laws of the desecration plane. Hey Omar, Lionheart. There's plenty of time to have a reckoning. Just wait for me to get to you. He faintly felt like he was almost at the level of breaking through the 3 heavy doors of myth. Now that his power level had improved significantly, he really wanted to take revenge. Not to mention that Osso had given him full power of command over the front lines, so Feynman was quite high up in authority. As long as he managed to conquer this small newly born dimension, he could even be considered to be the overall commander of the entire undead invasion. He was looking forward to a repeat performance of the Young Eye Calamity. He felt like he could be even cooler than Yang Eye back in the day. Thinking of this, Feynman laughed out loud, full of pride. He felt as if he was on top of the world. He even thought it was fortunate that he lost Zayuo's internal conflict back in the day. Don't be happy too early. Dimensional wills aren't easy to take care of. Let's hurry up and organize our armies, I have an ominous premonition. If Feynman was delighted simply for having received a key to help him unlock the path to becoming even more powerful, the former first senator, the far ancient bone dragon Gricasio had benefited even more than he did. Undead Emperor Oso's evaluation of Gricasio was, give Gricasio 200 more years, and he'll become an undead emperor just like us. Indeed, Gricasio was able to learn from an undead emperor bone dragon, and his plentiful accumulated experience placed him at the brink of becoming a new undead emperor. It was only a matter of time before he broke through the third and final heavy door of myth. It was apparent that he would eventually become a new undead emperor. Although Gricasio was telling Feynman to be cautious, it was only because of his typical habit of keeping a low profile. As the strongest in all of Zayuo, he had always been the strongest undead creature in Ike's mortal plane. Now that his power level had increased significantly as well, would he really be afraid of anyone? What a pity as that person isn't here anymore. Otherwise, I could show him my newly obtained power. Now that the far ancient bone dragon was finally stepping into the highest power levels, he even faintly felt the ambition to challenge that person who had always suppressed him. Oh! We'll definitely win. The living shall sleep eternally, while an eternal night shall arrive. Lord Gricasio has finally arrived. We can charge forth again. Various cheers attracted the two undead lords' attention. It happened to be that above one of the undead campgrounds, there was a tremendous bone dragon circling around. Most normal bone dragons wouldn't even be as large as one of this bone dragon's claws, and its wings of death covered the entire sky. The pressure that came from such a top-level undead was naturally viewed by all the high-level undead as their own reinforcements, which caused all the cheering. The undead armies here had constantly been suppressed, and one important reason was that there wasn't a top-level undead that could take overall command here. Now that they saw a far ancient bone dragon arrive who was at minimum a myth rank, of course they would be excited. There were some who possessed the information that even shouted at this veteran bone dragon's name of who they were expecting. However, not far away, the real Gricasio had an expression filled with surprise. He never heard of the undead emperors intending to send any other top-level bone dragon here. And why did this bone dragon's figure seem so familiar, as if he had met them somewhere before not long ago? Graya. Feynman was the one who shouted out in surprise. Graya, who loved her own beautiful appearance, hated to show off her bone dragon form. But in that final battle to decide Zayuo's royal authority, Graya, who suddenly descended in her bone dragon form, almost managed to destroy his entire darkness conference by herself. With her familiar mono waves in front of him, how could he not recognize her? Those with grudges would be easily overtaken by their feelings, and Feynman intended to rush out and take revenge right away. However, Gricasio stopped him. Wait a moment, there's someone on her back. Who cares if someone's on her back? With you and me fighting together, who would we possibly be afraid of? You should know Graya's personality. Would she let just anyone ride on her back? The only person possible would be that person. Could it be? The Lich Feynman was scared to the point of jumping in fright and hurriedly cast a distance viewing magic. What he saw was a certain Lich sitting on Graya's back. This Lich was casually resting on a lounge chair, enjoying the sunshine while wearing magical crystal sunglasses. He was even proudly waving down to the undead below, as if he was the real leader observing his own subordinates. Suddenly, he seemed to detect Feynman's vision spell spying on him, and he smiled directly at the invisible eye. He started saying something, and as he pointed his finger, Feynman's vision spell was cancelled out. Long time no see. You've been taking care of my children, so this time, allow me to personally play together with you. Let's have a good game. Gricasio, who was still far away in the distance, read those soul words out loud. The unique waves of mana were indisputable evidence of that person's identity, but Gricasio and Feynman didn't need evidence to begin with. Although the waves of mana he produced weren't particularly fierce, only that soul fire that seemed calm on the surface but was actually maniacal inside, along with the strange actions that nobody ever understood, made Gricasio confident that that person had finally returned. The existence that even all the undead emperors feared was actually still alive in the mortal plane. With so many years having passed by, he had only faked his death. What has he been secretly plotting all this time? Why did he appear now, at such a critical moment? Yang I. Impossible, impossible. Gricasio was still able to maintain his composure, but Feynman collapsed. Since Feynman had once been one of Emperor Yang I's strategists, of course he knew how scary Yang I was. Before, he had only dared to set up his own conference and try to usurp a royal authority in Zilua because he was 100% certain that Yang I would never return. Meanwhile, Gria and Yang I seemed to have received enough cheering and applause to satisfy them. Gria changed direction and began flying towards that distant patch of green forest. Gria slowly glided past the clouds. When she flew over the two undead lordheads, she even stopped to fly in a few circles here. Gricasio and Feynman could clearly see on the bone dragon's back that that person was joyously waving at them and even sending them flying kisses. That passion made it seem as if they were old friends that hadn't seen each other in such a long while. Hey! Even his passionate greetings were sent down. Hey! Feynman was so scared that he hurriedly waved back at that familiar soul fire. This wasn't the effect of any magical spell. It was merely his instinctive reaction from having been suppressed by Yang I's pressure for so long over the years. That Lich in the sky nodded in satisfaction at having received a response and patted the bone dragon on the back. Only then did Gria slowly continue flying towards the forest. The undead in the campgrounds were under the impression that their reinforcements were going to attack the enemy right after arriving, so another explosive round of cheers erupted for the Bone Dragon's expedition. Lord Gricasio, may you live forever. May Emperor also live forever. The two new undead commanders stayed behind in a stupefied daze. Gricasio, who was being praised by the undead, had an expression filled with hesitation, as his newly born ambitions to rise above had already vanished into bubbles. He had been scared by the person's arrival. Gricasio and Feynman could only watch as their enemy left in the distance, completely forgetting their responsibilities as the undead commanders. Neither of them was able to work up the courage to stop her as Gria vanished from their sight. After all, that would mean directly facing off against that person, an existence who suppressed them for hundreds of years even after his supposed death. Sigh. We should first go out there to reorganize the armies. Otherwise, those young ones might impulsively rush out after them. Yeah, let's not make them wait. Let's go right now. How ridiculous. They actually couldn't even recognize the highest ranked leaders of their own army. Alright, then. When a certain Lich appeared in front of them, he was able to make these two undead lords that even true gods would have headaches about into nothing more than scared dogs with their tails tucked in. After all, they had been living in that person's shadow for far too long. Chapter 280, Forest of Dreams, Part 1 of 2. Ike was home to a large number of forests. Some were famous, and some were unheard of. The most dangerous of them all, Fantasy Forest, was located in the Bardi Empire and was a land upon which even I wouldn't dare trod. It was a forest of peace. There were no gnomes, but any forest where elves resided would hide their countless treasures and secrets. They would be a forbidden ground to other species, but among the forests, there were still differences. An example was the Silver Mirror Forest of the Silver Elves. If you walked among those trees, you would be able to faintly see elven scouts and rangers beneath the leaves. Fully equipped centaur knights would be patrolling around, along with holy, powerful and armed unicorn knights. If you had excellent hearing, you would be able to hear the sounds of knights practicing and bows firing in the distance. But you had to be careful. There would always be eyes on you and whispers about. You could walk for half a day in the Silver Mirror Forest without meeting a single elf. It was obvious that humans were viewed with much distrust there. Yet looking at things from a different standpoint with the other elf species in mind, many things would be different. Should I say that it's to be expected of upper-ranked elves that transform themselves into a fighting species? Rather than calling it a peaceful forest, It seemed more like an elven-style military campground. Their bows and spears might be overly exquisite, but the enchantments and materials used were of such a high quality that they would make anyone jealous, even legends. Well, their unicorn knights' extravagant equipment even made me want to rob them. The Moon Elves' style was to make everything beautiful and to have plants flourish to the point of unnaturalness. In a Moon Elf forest, one would be able to see all sorts of sculptures of the gods along with other types of artwork everywhere. Even their hereditary elven tree houses were sculpted with endless runes and designs, and they would only live in the most comfortable environments. Unlike the Silver Mirror Forest where it would be impossible for a human to meet with a single elf, ordinary elves were seen everywhere in Moon Elf forests. They weren't nearly as wary of outsiders, and they even sold their products in street-side stalls. Yep, I'm talking about the former Tassel Kingdom. Now, although these elves still had their elven magical techniques and artistry even after transforming into Greyblood elves, their equipment was still overly decorative and impractical, while their expensive enchantment materials were only for the sake of making their products look more beautiful. For me, unless they were able to abandon those useless decorative elements in their equipment, their products could only be sold off as artwork. It would be far more effective to buy some dwarven products with the money made instead. As one of the final species of upper-ranked elves that still survived, the Wood Elves had already lost their own kingdom. They no longer lived in forests that belonged solely to them, nor did they possess their power to change a forest's environment. Still, they would forever be the children favored by the forest. They didn't use any nature magic to change the environment as they pleased, but they would typically live in the most natural environments of all. Walking through such a forest would be no different from walking through an ordinary one, but you would always be able to see powerful creatures rarely seen in the outside world, such as mountain giants, giants, druids, redcaps, and chimeras. Those creatures weren't the Wood Elves' subordinates but undertook the important responsibility of protecting the forest. The peaceful Wood Elves were also the elven species with the best reputation. They were one of the few upper-ranked elven species that didn't treat other species arrogantly, and many Wood Elves had the habit of traveling far and wide. They loved all forms of life, and these Wood Elves who were so fond of traveling were typically welcomed by all species. There were even some royalty that would invite them to become outstanding teachers. However, this world didn't have only kind intentions. If they didn't stay on guard, perhaps the Wood Elves would have long since become extinct, as certain people treated them as treasures to be harvested. Any natural forest would be the best refuge for them, and the powerful creatures living within it would naturally become their allies. All the trees and plants would become sentries that watched unfamiliar invaders. In front of a living forest, those with wicked intentions wouldn't even be able to find the correct path to the elves. Wood Elves weren't easy to deal with when in a forest, but that didn't mean that Wood Elves were easy to deal with outside, either. If a roaming Wood Elf was forced to the brink, she could potentially use nature's wrath, a Wood Elf natural talent ability usable only once in her life, which would transform an entire nearby forest into a living weapon for revenge that wouldn't rest until its target was dead. Although not every Wood Elf possessed the ability to use nature's wrath, any that did could cause damage on the level of a forbidden spell's destructiveness. That was why every country strictly forbid any illegal activities against the Wood Elves. And today, the moment I stepped into this forest, I felt like the entire world had changed around me. The strong sensation of being in a different world gave me a headache and dizziness which just wouldn't go away. When I looked around me, the currently breathing plants and trees around me gave me the strong sensation of life. Yes, that's right, life. This entire forest was living, it was breathing, it was sleeping, and from the moment I entered, it opened up its countless eyes and was silently watching me. Oh my, how unfriendly. It was obviously unwise to be flying through a thick magical forest, so the bone dragon Graya stopped at the forest's edge. But right when she transformed into her human form, a purple-green wall of thorns suddenly rose and blocked Graya's path. The forest detected Graya's undead nature, so it unhesitatingly closed the door to her as it was battling against the undead, refusing to let her in. As for me, a pathway suddenly opened up in the forest just like a secret path from a fairy tale. On the path's sides were brilliantly blooming flowers that seemed to be welcoming me as a guest. The moment I walked on this grassy path, that wall of thorns suddenly rose up behind me, making Graya almost crash into it when she tried following me. This obvious difference in treatment made Graya almost choke in anger. But as I walked into this forest, I was secretly astonished. This strong sensation of being in a different world transformed into something more and more tangible. While the ridiculously strong signs of life in the forest's plants were doubtlessly the best evidence, this forest was the ruler of this world, as well as the core of this world. What astonished me the most of all were the plant life forms that lowered their heads to me and smiled in greeting. Although their physical appearances were quite different from all other living creatures, and their thin and wooden bodies made them have strange and abnormal shapes, their souls and expressions indicated that they already had independent thinking and intelligence of their own. They were intelligent creatures just like humans. "It's wonderful that you were able to come. Mother will surely be delighted." A young-sounding voice echoed in my ears. A small wood spirit was waiting for me on a tree branch not far from me. Seeing that I noticed her, she jumped down. I noticed that she appeared much younger than the other wood spirits, more like a child elf. However, her head reached my waist. "You are? I'm Mother's second daughter, Diligence. We've all met you before in the past. It's just that you've never seen us in this form before." She had light red hair, much different from Amelia's colors, and a more exquisite face than even an elf's. Her thorny flower petals were the best accessories, and a thorny miniskirt covered only the most important parts. There were even flower petals on her feet, and she would spread the fragrance of flowers as she walked, as if she was a forest fairy from a fairy tale. Although the face really resembled Amelia's, I would say that her overall physical appearance only resembled Amelia by 30%. That's because in my impression, Amelia herself had never, ever smiled so brightly and sunnily in her life. Either she would laugh maniacally, completely out of control, or she would secretly snicker, hiding her laughter behind her mage robe. Meanwhile, this little cutie before me had the purest kind intentions on her pink face. This was a lively child that anyone would have a good impression of upon their first meeting, so how could she possibly seem related to Amelia? The 7 virtues. I was surprised for a moment as I recalled the frightening piranha plant garden, but then I felt that it was only natural. Since Amelia had already reached this level, it was expected for her 7 virtues to become completely independent. With complete independence, they even had the possibility of betraying their creator. In that case, the first thing I needed to do here was, "Do you not have a name yet? How about I help you come up with one? Don't get any mistaken impressions of me." Since I intended to go out with, I meant communicate with her, how could I possibly not know her name? Of course the first thing would be to give her a name. That's not necessary. It's really not necessary. I already have a name. My big sister helped come up with it. I'm Rosa. Rosa seemed to have gotten scared by my passion as she hurriedly backed 2 steps away from me, tossing a flurry of flower petals. It seemed like she was planning on escaping at any moment. How uncreative. Since your foundational form was a rose, she directly used it as a name for you. How insincere. Shouldn't your name at least adhere to your color scheme? How about I give you a new one? What do you think of True Red? Right, you said you have an older sister. Is she white? How about calling her Mercury? Perhaps she had never come into contact with outsiders since her birth, as she was filled with embarrassment and panic when I walked up closer to her. However, she suddenly calmed down and seemed to be listening to something. "My sister wants me to ask if you're intending to gather a 7-color combination? But, right now, there are only 3 of us sisters, and she's not white, either. Nor is there a possibility of having 7 of us in a short period of time, so we appreciate but politely reject your intentions." I wanted to say more, but little Rosa seemed to hear something else as she covered her ears and vanished into the forest, leaving behind only one final sentence: "Sister wants me to go help her with something. You can find Mother if you just follow this path, so go." She left, while her clear bell-like voice echoed throughout the forest. As expected of a Rosa's transformation, her faint aroma naturally allured others, making me want to inhale that scent as much as I could. However, I directly left. After all, I knew that Amelia's Diligence naturally excelled in poisons, so if I accidentally inhaled too much, that would be the end of me. However, as I walked down the forested path, I somehow began feeling like I was quite pitiful. I created 5 deadly scents, and each of them were far stronger individually than Amelia's virtues that were only 3 in number. I excelled in creation compared to her. But I felt that I had lost utterly from the very foundation when I saw the cute little girl. I lost. Forget about the fact that apart from that silly cat, they're all male. Why is it that there's not a single normal one among them? A dumb dog that doesn't even know how to play fetch, a zombie that preferred to be a male battleship, a silly fatty that could never eat his fill, and a muscular bastard who had strange ideas about beauty. If I compare them to Amelia's new virtues that are like something out of shoujo manga or an idol drama, not to mention in a fairy tale style, while mine are all from comedy manga and horror movies, not to mention that they're idiots, how can I tolerate it? In the end, my extreme pity for myself caused me to shout out loudly, "Amelia, there's such a large difference in the drawing style. Can we switch? I know that you hate males, so I'll give the silly cat to you. If you think that's not enough, I'll throw in a doggy that can transform into anything you want, like a beautiful woman or whatever. I don't have too much for my requirements. I just want that little Rosa from earlier." Clang. A huge pine cone suddenly smashed down on my head with enough force to knock me over. It representing a certain someone's attitude. I even heard, "You stinky bad man that hurt mother's heart, go away from above me." When I lifted my head to look, I saw a tiny purple figure secretly leaving through the trees. Another one of the 3 sisters? Is that humility or temperance? Why do they all have the form of young girls? Does Amelia object that much to adults and males? Forget it. Since I'm here already, I'll learn sooner or later. As I walked down this path, I was astonished by more than just the virtues from earlier. Mature wood spirits were chatting with each other in the forest. Some of the younger ones were messing around and having fun with each other, while other wood spirits were cultivating new magical plants. Some enjoyed the sweet fruits from the trees. They used shiny leaves as a currency to trade amongst themselves. This forest world filled with life had its own society and market. Perhaps, I had lost in more than just the physical appearance of my creations. It was obvious that this patch of forest originally didn't have a path in it, as there were many tiny obstacles on this path. However, the flowers would lower themselves and avoid my steps, while the gigantic trees would suddenly pull up their roots and move themselves. The thorny fences would automatically bury themselves in the ground, and the further I went in this forest, the more I could faintly detect a certain will summoning me. "Amelia?" As I went through the forest, I saw a green-haired sleeping beauty, deep asleep on the petals of the largest blooming lotus flower. She was floating on a peaceful and calm lake, surrounded by trees on all sides. A light breeze kept her cool, and moonlight from an unknown source illuminated the lotus petal boat. Stars glittered in the sky above, and Amelia's snow-white skin appeared rather weak under the starlight. "I'm here." Before I even finished speaking, countless memories and illusions created a new world, and I was instantly drawn into a fantastical dreamlike world that had surpassed the boundaries of reality.